Imagine the night, tens of thousands of years ago. The world was darker then. No cities, no lamps, only the fire we made with trembling hands. Above us, the sky spread vast and unknowable, filled with constellations too many to name. Thunder rolled across valleys. Lightning split the heavens in searing white. And in those moments, humanity imagined something greater. A shadow in the storm. A shape among the clouds. Wings that spanned the horizon. Eyes glowing like molten embers. A roar that echoed like the grinding of mountains. This was the first image of the dragon. For as long as humans have told stories, we have whispered of such beings. Across every continent, in languages divided by oceans and centuries, the image repeats. A serpent with wings. A predator with fire. A guardian of caves, rivers, or the sky. How can it be that so many cultures, Chinese, Norse, Babylonian, Aztec, all dreamt of the same creature? Is this a coincidence? Or is it a memory, buried deep in the collective human mind? Picture an ancient village on the steppe. A hunter returns from the mountains, speaking of bones larger than any beast they've ever seen. A skull with teeth longer than a hand. A rib cage buried in stone, arched like the frame of a monstrous chest. What explanation could they give, except that a dragon once lay there? In another land, a shepherd watches the horizon as fire bursts from a volcano. Ash blots out the sun. Lava carves rivers of molten red through the earth. How else could they understand such fury, except to say, a dragon is waking? And so, imagination took the wildness of earth, storms, beasts, fire, and gave it a single face. The dragon is not merely a creature. It is the embodiment of fear. The fear of fire, which both saves and destroys. The fear of predators, who stalk in silence before striking. The fear of storms, which arrive with no warning, unanswerable, uncontrollable. The fear of death, which waits beyond the reach of understanding. All of these merged together, and the mind painted something larger than life. Something impossible, yet undeniable. And in that painting, the dragon was born. But if dragons were real, if flesh and blood walked where myth now treads, what would that mean? Would history itself be rewritten? Would our ancestors not only tell stories, but record encounters? Would castles be designed not merely to repel men, but to withstand fire from the sky? Would civilizations rise or fall, depending on whether they could tame these beasts? The thought alone twists history into something unrecognizable. Yet the fascination persists, because even without proof, we feel as though dragons belong here, in some hidden cave, in some uncharted mountain range, waiting. Across the world, the first images of dragons often appear in art, scratched into cave walls, carved into bones, painted on pottery. A spiral serpent with open jaws, a creature half snake, half bird, a beast hovering between the earth we knew and the skies we feared. Some of these depictions are simple, crude sketches of snakes with exaggerated heads. Others are astonishingly complex, scaled, winged, horned, coiled around symbols of the cosmos. Why? Because the dragon was never just an animal. It was a story made flesh, a story painted to survive the forgetting. And when we listen carefully to these ancient stories, patterns emerge. In Mesopotamia, Tiamat, the chaos dragon, represents the untamed sea. In Greece, the serpent python guarded sacred places. In China, the long dragon ruled over rain, rivers, and the balance of heaven. In the Bible, Leviathan coils in the deep, breathing fire, unchallenged by men. Different names, different forms, but the same essence. It is as though humanity's first act of myth-making was to invent or to remember the dragon. Why does this matter? Because myths are not random. They are the language of the human soul. When we dream, when we fear, when we imagine, our minds reach for symbols that hold weight. And there, at the beginning of the story, at the beginning of fear, the dragon waits. Close your eyes and picture it. The ground shakes. The air grows hot. A roar cracks the silence. Flames bloom in the sky. Your ancestors stood in awe of forces they could not name. And in those moments, they gave shape to what they saw. A monster, vast and alive. Whether real or not, the dragon became part of us. A mirror to our terror. A mirror to our wonder. And so tonight, when you look up into the sky, consider this. Perhaps there never were dragons of bone and scale, but there have always been dragons of fire and imagination, and those may be the most real of all. Every culture tells stories of dragons, from the deserts of Mesopotamia, to the rivers of China, to the forests of Europe, to the pyramids of the Maya. The same creature returns again and again, scaled, serpentine, powerful beyond reason. How could civilizations separated by oceans and centuries dream the same dream? Is this coincidence or memory? Let us begin in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. The Babylonians spoke of Tiamat, a dragon of the sea, a vast chaos serpent, mother of monsters. She was not simply an enemy to be slain, but a primal force. Her body was split apart by the god Marduk, forming the heavens and the earth. In this myth, the dragon is creation itself, both terrifying and necessary. Dragons here were not just beasts. They were the very fabric of the cosmos. Travel eastward to China, where the dragon takes on another shape. Here, dragons are not monsters to kill, but guardians, teachers, rulers of rivers and skies. The Chinese dragon has no wings. It coils through the heavens like a river, its body endless, its breath carrying the rain. In dynastic China, emperors claimed descent from dragons. The throne itself was called the dragon seat. Temples carved with dragon motifs shimmered in stone and bronze. And to this day, the dragon is not a memory of fear, but of blessing. Why such a difference? Why does one culture see chaos, another fortune? Perhaps because each society painted dragons in the colors of what it most valued or most feared. Across the seas, in Europe, the dragon became something darker. Here, it was a beast of greed, a hoarder of treasure, a threat to maidens and villages alike. In the Anglo-Saxon epic Beowulf, a dragon's wrath brings ruin. In the legend of St. George, a knight slays a dragon to save his people. In Norse sagas, Sigurd kills the dragon Fafnir, who guards the cursed gold. Always the dragon waits at the edge of civilization, a test for the hero, a trial by fire. For Europe, dragons symbolized not balance, but danger, not guardians, but enemies. And yet, when we look to the Americas, the dragon returns again in yet another form. Among the Maya and the Aztec, the god Quetzalcoatl takes the shape of a feathered serpent, part bird, part snake, a fusion of sky and earth. He was not only a god of wind and learning, but also a bringer of civilization itself. Elsewhere in North America, indigenous peoples spoke of horned serpents living in rivers and lakes, spirits of water, dangerous but sacred. The imagery is unmistakable. The serpent, the wings, the cosmic power, separated by oceans, yet telling the same story. How do we explain this? Some say it is a coincidence, that snakes, storms, and fire were universal experiences, that every culture shaped fear into the same outline, just as every culture told stories of the flood or the trickster. Others whisper that it may not be a coincidence at all, that perhaps dragons were once real, or that memories of creatures like them echo from humanity's earliest encounters. Consider this. Our ancestors once lived alongside giant reptiles. Crocodiles are 20 feet long, snakes capable of swallowing deer whole, birds with wingspans wider than a house. Even the bones of dinosaurs, uncovered by chance, could have inspired tales of monsters no man had seen alive. Did these encounters plant the seeds of the dragon myth? And yet, the similarity goes deeper. It is not just snakes or lizards. It is the combination of traits: a body scaled like a serpent, wings like a bird, the fury of fire or storm, a guardian's role of treasure, of water, of cosmic order. How did the same creature emerge on every continent? Jungian psychology suggests an answer: the archetype. That deep within the human unconscious, shared across time and culture, are certain symbols, patterns that rise again and again. The dragon, then, is one of the oldest archetypes of all, a way for the human mind to embody the unknown. But myths are never only dreams, they are also memories. Could it be that the dragon represents a distant truth? A truth of creatures long vanished, remembered dimly in story? Or perhaps a truth of human fear, given flesh by imagination? Let us return to the question: why did every culture dream of dragons? Maybe because we all lived under the same sky, saw the same storms, felt the same terror of fire, watched serpents coil in silence, heard thunder roll like the roar of something vast. The dragon became the universal answer, a single image to explain the unexplainable. Even today, this memory lingers. In art, in film, in the minds of children who sketch wings and flames without ever having seen them. It seems almost instinctive, as though the dragon does not belong to any single place, but to all of us. Perhaps it was never a matter of whether dragons were real creatures of flesh. Perhaps the truth is stranger. Dragons are real because humans cannot stop dreaming about them. They are the memory of fire, the echo of storms, the shadow of snakes, and the reminder that in every culture, across every age, humanity has always looked outward into mystery and seen dragons staring back. Beneath our feet, the earth keeps secrets. Secrets of creatures so vast, so strange, that even their broken remains are enough to stir the imagination. When early humans stumbled upon bones larger than any living beast, what could they think? Here was proof of giants. Here was evidence of monsters. Here, in stone, was the dragon. In ancient China, villagers would often find long, curved bones buried in the soil. They were unlike the bones of cattle or horses. They were enormous, heavy, and weathered by centuries. What did they call them? Dragon bones. For thousands of years, these fossils were dug from riverbanks and cliffsides, crushed into powder, and sold in apothecaries as medicine. Ground into tonics, mixed into teas, thought to cure fevers, headaches, and even strengthen the body. To the ancient mind, this made sense. For if the bones came from dragons, they must carry some of the dragon's power. A creature mighty enough to shake the earth would surely leave behind healing in its remains. Only in the 20th century did paleontologists realize that many of these so-called dragon bones were in fact the fossils of dinosaurs, creatures that had lived millions of years before the first human drew breath. The irony is almost poetic. People believed in dragons because of fossils, and in a way, they weren't entirely wrong. The Greeks, too, encountered strange bones. In the hills of the Mediterranean, they found skulls larger than any human, with gaping cavities at the center. They thought these were the remains of the Cyclopes, the one-eyed giants of their legends. But today we know the truth. These were mammoth skulls. The central cavity, not a single eye, but the nasal opening where the trunk once attached. How could they have known? To them, the bones confirmed what myth had already whispered. Giants once roamed the earth. If mammoths could be mistaken for cyclopes, how many other fossils could have been mistaken for dragons? Consider the skeletons of marine reptiles, found on mountaintops long before geology explained how seas had risen and fallen. The sinuous bodies of ichthyosaurs, the long necks of plesiosaurs, the massive jaws of mosasaurs, all emerging from rock like ghosts. To the eye of a shepherd or a miner or a wandering traveler, These bones must have been undeniable proof. Proof that the earth had once been home to beasts of nightmare. How easy it would be to weave a story from the fragments. A long jaw becomes a serpent's snout. A wing bone becomes evidence of flight. A fossilized rib cage becomes the prison of fire. A myth is born not from invention, but from interpretation. Even in Europe, where fossils were rarer, there were discoveries that stoked the imagination. In Austria, in France, in England, massive bones were unearthed by farmers tilling the soil. They had no knowledge of extinction, no concept of deep time. What conclusion could they draw, except that these bones belonged to dragons, great beasts that once roamed, and perhaps still roamed, the land? Stories grew alongside the bones. A strange skeleton found in a cave might give rise to a village legend of a dragon slain long ago. A collection of ribs uncovered in a quarry could be pointed to as proof of the monster once defeated by St. George or some unnamed knight. The bones lent weight to the tailies, and the tailies gave meaning to the bones. There is another possibility, a more haunting one. What if early humans did not merely imagine dragons from fossils? What if they still lived in some form when our ancestors first began to tell stories? The last dinosaurs fell more than 60 million years ago, but giant reptiles continued, crocodiles, Komodo dragons, enormous snakes. And in the Ice Age, creatures like mammoths and saber-toothed cats shared the earth with humans. Could it be that some fossil finds were mixed with living memories of predators, creating myths both familiar and strange? When faced with bones too vast to comprehend, the human mind filled the gaps, not with science, but with story. The idea of the dragon bone trade in China is particularly striking. Think of it, a civilization handling fossils for over 2,000 years, not as paleontological treasures, but as medicine. Powdered fragments of ancient giants were swallowed as cures. The deep past consumed by the living present. Even today, some apothecaries in rural China still sell so-called dragon bones. And sometimes, hidden among them, scientists discover genuine fossils of long-extinct species. It is as though the Earth itself has always whispered its forgotten history, and humanity has always answered, not with science, but with myth. So the question lingers, were dragons real? Perhaps not in flesh and blood as we imagine them, soaring through the skies, breathing fire. But in another sense, they were. Their bones lay scattered across the world, waiting for curious hands to find them. And when those hands did, the stories of dragons grew. The myths we inherited may be less about invention and more about memory, a memory written in stone, misread as the legacy of monsters. Imagine a vast sky painted with storms. Lightning flickers against rolling clouds, and in the silence between thunder, an ancient image stirs in the human imagination. A dragon, wings unfurled, scales glistening like molten stone. For thousands of years, across cultures divided by oceans and deserts, humanity has returned to the same image. Yet what does it mean that the dragon has lived in our minds with such persistence? Why has it come to symbolize both benevolence and terror, fortune and destruction? The dragon is unlike any other mythic beast. Lions, serpents, eagles all hold power within their own cultures. But the dragon seems to transcend borders, a global archetype, shifting in meaning depending on the soil in which it takes root. In the East, dragons are revered. They are celestial forces of water and rain, bringers of life to parched lands. To speak of dragons in China is to invoke prosperity, power, and heavenly blessing. The emperor himself was once said to be a descendant of the dragon, his throne known as the Dragon Throne. In the West, however, dragons take on a darker role. They are guardians of treasure, hoarders of gold, beasts of fire and shadow. In medieval Europe, the dragon was an embodiment of sin, chaos, and the forces of hell itself. Knights who set out to slay dragons were not just fighting monsters. They were waging symbolic war against evil, ignorance, and temptation. How can the same creature hold such opposite meanings? One explanation lies in environment. In the monsoon landscapes of East Asia, where survival depended on the rhythms of rain and river, the dragon became a symbol of water. Curved like the winding Yangtze, scaled like a carp leaping upstream, the eastern dragon embodied the life-giving floods that nourished rice fields. It was no accident that the dragon's shape mirrored clouds and waves. In the drier climates of Europe and the Near East, however, fire was the greater fear. Lightning-scorched forests, volcanic eruptions, and the devastation of uncontrolled flame etched themselves into the psyche. Thus, the dragon was imagined not as rain but as fire, not as life but as death. The cultural lens shaped the symbol. Dragons have also always stood as metaphors for power, both human and divine. In China, the dragon became the ultimate emblem of imperial rule. To wear dragon robes was to signal proximity to the divine order. To call oneself dragon-born was to lay claim to the mandate of heaven. The dragon was not chaos, it was legitimacy. In Europe, however, power often meant conquest over chaos. Kings and saints proved their worth not by claiming kinship with dragons, but by defeating them. The famous tale of St. George slaying the dragon is less about the beast itself and more about authority of church over wilderness, of light over darkness. The dragon was never neutral. It was always tied to structures of power, shaping how societies imagined authority, order, and divinity itself. Even today, the dragon's symbolism lingers in strange corners. The Welsh flag still bears a red dragon, Y Dreg Gok, symbolizing resilience and defiance. In Bhutan, the national flag carries the druk, the thunder dragon, gripping jewels of wealth. In modern China, parents still call their children little dragons, hoping they will grow strong and prosperous. And in popular culture, from Tolkien's Smaug to Daenerys Targaryen's winged beasts, the dragon remains the ultimate shorthand for power, greed, or destiny. The symbol is immortal, even if the creature never was. Perhaps most striking is how often dragons blur the line between gods and monsters. In Mesopotamian myth, the chaos dragon Tiamat was not merely an adversary, but a primal goddess of the sea, her body split by the god Marduk to form the heavens and the earth. In Hindu tradition, the serpent dragon Vritra was slain by Indra, releasing the waters of the world. These stories reveal that dragons were never just creatures. They were cosmic principles. They embodied the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between civilization and the wild, between life-giving rain and death-dealing fire. Now imagine, for a moment, that dragons truly existed. Their symbolism would not just be metaphor, but lived reality. In the East, emperors might not only claim the dragon as image, but harness its literal presence, perhaps parading living dragons as proof of their divine right. Festivals that released paper dragons into the sky might instead release real ones, soaring like thunderclouds over cities. In the West, knights would not merely slay imagined beasts in legend, but engage in real combat, their victories immortalized in stained glass and cathedral stone. The dragon as a symbol of sin and chaos would carry even more weight if fire-breathing monsters truly ravaged villages or demanded sacrifices. The duality of dragons as giver and destroyer, divine and demonic, would not just be cultural. It would be experiential. The world would be shaped by their presence, and the stories would become indistinguishable from history. But whether or not dragons ever existed in flesh and bone, their symbolic presence reveals something profound. They are mirrors of us, of our hopes and fears, our need for order, our awe of nature's power. The dragon is not a creature we invented lightly. It is a condensation of storm and flame, of predator and god, of terror and transcendence. Perhaps this is why the dragon remains so enduring. It is not just a symbol of power, fear, and divinity. It is the ultimate reminder of how human beings confront the unknown, by giving it shape, by making it a creature, by breathing into it the fire of imagination. The line between history and myth blurs, and somewhere in the cracks of the earth, the bones of dragons still wait. Of all the gifts ascribed to dragons, one power stands above all others: the ability to breathe fire. It is an image burned into the human imagination. A colossal beast exhaling gouts of flame, forests igniting, villages reduced to ash. Yet if dragons were real creatures, could such a thing truly exist in nature? Could biology itself engineer fire? Across the world, from European folktales to Chinese legends, dragons were often described as creatures of fire. In the West, they terrorized kingdoms with flaming breath, a weapon as divine as it was destructive. In the East, they were beings tied to lightning, storms, and cosmic energy. But stories of fire-breathing beasts are not confined to dragons alone. In ancient India, the Vedic god Ugni was described as a devourer of wood and flesh, spewing tongues of flame. In Norse sagas, serpents like Fafnir exhaled poisonous vapors that scorched the earth. Myth after myth whispers the same impossible detail: living fire. So, how could nature create such a phenomenon? Let us begin with one of the most common candidates: methane. In the natural world, methane is a byproduct of digestion, found in abundance in ruminants like cows. Each day, herds of livestock release vast quantities of this invisible gas. Now imagine a dragon, a creature of colossal size, feeding on decaying matter or a protein-rich diet. Within its stomach, methane could accumulate in specialized chambers. But a question arises: how could methane become flame? By itself, the gas is inert. It requires ignition. And here, science may turn to the humble electric eel or the firefly. Both creatures demonstrate that biology can indeed generate sparks or light. Could dragons have developed an organ designed to release methane through the throat, ignited by a spark-generating mechanism in the mouth? It sounds fantastical, but in principle, it is no stranger than the reality of creatures we know today. Then there is another model from nature, far stranger and far deadlier: the bombardier beetle. This small insect possesses twin chemical chambers in its abdomen. When threatened, it mixes hydroquinone and hydrogen peroxide inside a reinforced cavity. The reaction is explosive. In an instant, the beetle ejects boiling, noxious liquid at nearly 100 degrees Celsius, hot enough to burn human skin. Scale this up to dragon size, and we begin to glimpse a possibility. Instead of spitting mere acid, could dragons have evolved the chemistry to ignite flame? Perhaps combining volatile compounds in a chamber lined with heat-resistant tissue, then channeling the result outward in a fiery blast. It is terrifying. It is improbable. But it is not impossible. Biology often relies on partnership. The human gut itself contains trillions of bacteria, essential to our digestion. Some deep-sea creatures rely on bioluminescent bacteria to glow in the abyss. Now imagine a dragon's internal ecosystem: colonies of specialized microbes generating volatile gases, feeding off food residue, producing combustible compounds as part of their life cycle. The dragon would become not just an animal, but a living furnace, a host to tiny firemakers. When exhaled and exposed to air, or sparked by a biological trigger, these gases could burst into flame. The dragon's roar would become a literal ignition, a marriage of biology and chemistry. Nature, once again, using cooperation to achieve the extraordinary. But all these ideas meet one obstacle: ignition. Fire is not merely gas, not merely heat. It is a chain reaction requiring a spark, a match, a catalyst. Could a dragon produce its own spark? Some researchers have speculated about piezoelectric crystals, like quartz, embedded in specialized teeth. As jaws snap shut, the grinding could produce a spark, igniting expelled gas. Others imagine keratinous plates or ridged bones in the mouth, designed to strike together like flint and steel. The act of roaring itself could become the act of lighting flame. Fictional as it sounds, sparks in nature are not unheard of. Some species of shrimp can snap their claws so fast, they create cavitation bubbles hotter than the surface of the sun for a fraction of a second. If tiny creatures can unleash such forces, perhaps giants could do more. And yet, in our own world, we already live among fire breathers. Spitting cobras can project venom several meters with unerring aim. Electric eels discharge hundreds of volts. Certain fungi release spores in explosive bursts. Even birds, like the African honey guide, have learned to summon humans to fire, guiding them to beehives in exchange for honey. Each of these facts is a fragment, a puzzle piece. Taken together, they remind us that evolution does not play by human rules. Nature is full of improbable inventions. But if dragons truly breathed fire, there would be costs. Flame would scar the delicate tissues of a throat. Methane chambers could explode if ruptured. The energy required would be immense, demanding enormous caloric intake. Perhaps this is why, if dragons once existed, they did not survive. Their own biology may have been too dangerous, too unstable, to endure across ages. Fire breath could have been both their greatest weapon and their greatest weakness. In the end, fire-breathing dragons remain a symbol at the border of science and myth. Too strange to dismiss entirely, too miraculous to prove. Yet they live on in our imagination, precisely because fire is life and death, creation and destruction. To dream of a creature that commands it, that is to dream of ultimate power. Perhaps dragons never breathed flame. Or perhaps, somewhere in the fossil record, lies the charred trace of a beast who once did. Until we know, the question burns on. When we think of dragons, the image is almost instinctive. Vast leathery wings stretched across the sky, the thunder of their beating, echoing across mountains, and the shadow of a creature so massive it blots out the sun. But here lies one of the great paradoxes of the dragon myth. Could something so large, so heavy, so seemingly impossible in scale, ever truly take flight? To answer this question, we must begin not with fantasy, but with nature itself. For nature has already attempted some astonishing experiments in flight. Let us first recall the pterosaurs, the great flying reptiles of the Mesozoic era. Some, like Quetzalcoatlus northerpi, reached wingspans of over 35 feet, nearly as wide as a modern fighter jet. They were fragile yet formidable, with hollow bones and an anatomical design that pushed the limits of flight. Despite their immense size, most paleontologists agree that these creatures were airborne, at least for short distances. And if a reptile once managed to master the skies at such a scale, perhaps the idea of a dragon is not quite so unthinkable. Yet dragons are not imagined as fragile. Quite the opposite, they are depicted as creatures of muscle, scale, fire, and stone-like weight. Unlike the delicacy of the pterosaur, dragons are built in our stories to embody brute force. And here, physics begins to place its constraints. The mechanics of flight are deceptively simple. To rise into the air, a creature must generate enough lift to counteract its weight. Lift, in turn, depends on wing surface area, air pressure, and velocity. Small birds manage this effortlessly. A sparrow flutters with rapid strokes. An eagle soars with wide, steady wings. But the heavier the creature, the larger its wings must become. At a certain point, the ratio between mass and lift begins to break down. Scientists call this the square-cube law principle that governs the scaling of life. As a creature grows larger, its weight increases faster than its strength. Double a dragon's size, and its volume, and therefore its mass, increases eightfold. But the surface area of its wings and the strength of its muscles only quadruple. At some threshold, the dragon simply becomes too heavy to rise. And yet life has often found loopholes in such rules. Consider the Andean condor, with a wingspan stretching over 10 feet. It is the largest living flying bird today, and though it cannot flap continuously like a sparrow, it has mastered the art of soaring, riding thermal updrafts with hardly a movement. The condor shows us that flight is not only about strength, but about strategy, how an animal adapts to the invisible rivers of air that surround us. Could dragons have done the same? Imagine them as masters of the mountains, launching themselves from cliffs to catch rising thermals. Perhaps they did not flap endlessly through the skies, but soared with grace, conserving energy, gliding vast distances like the albatross across an ocean of clouds. But even so, the image of a fire-breathing beast lifting from the ground still challenges our sense of plausibility. Bones that must be both light and strong, muscles that must be powerful enough to hurl tons of living weight skyward. Energy demands so great that even the bombardier beetle's chemistry seems modest in comparison. Some biologists, when entertaining the question, have speculated about biological compromises. What if a dragon's bones were honeycombed like those of birds, air-filled yet reinforced with mineral struts? What if their wings were not thin and fragile, but supported by vast membranes like those of bats, layered and vascular, capable of absorbing oxygen directly to fuel their colossal muscles? Another possibility arises when we consider the oceans. The largest living animal to take to the air is not a bird, but the manta ray, a creature that soars beneath the sea with wingspans exceeding 20 feet. In the denser medium of water, lift is easier to achieve, drag easier to overcome. Could the dragon have originated in such a realm? A hybrid creature born of sea and sky? Its wings evolved first for gliding through liquid, only later adapted for the thinner currents of air? If so, their flight might have been limited, reserved for short bursts or dramatic displays. This would fit well with the ancient stories. Dragons perched upon hoards, guarding mountains or temples, not endlessly circling the skies like geese. Their flight, when it came, was something extraordinary, an eruption of power, a miracle of biology, a moment meant to inspire awe and terror. And here lies the heart of the paradox. The dragon, as we imagine, it may be too large to fly in the way birds or bats do. But within the mythology, its flight is not ordinary. It is supernatural, or at least rarefied. The dragon does not simply fly. It conquers the air itself. It is worth remembering that even among living creatures, flight often looks impossible. The bumblebee, for instance, long puzzled aerodynamicists with wings far too small for its bulk until deeper study, revealed vortices of air that give the insect lift beyond what simple equations predicted. Perhaps the dragon, too, possessed an unknown adaptation, muscular, skeletal, or even chemical, that let it defy the constraints of our mathematics. And so, we return to the question, could something so massive, so stone-like, truly fly? The honest answer lies somewhere between impossibility and imagination. Physics resists, but history hints. Myth tells us that humans across continents saw something, or at least needed to believe in something, that ruled the skies. If dragons were real, perhaps they flew not as effortless masters of the air, but as creatures on the edge of possibility, pushing biology, physics, and evolution to their limits. They may have struggled, soared only in bursts, or relied upon terrain and air currents. Yet in that struggle lies something even more powerful than perfection, the image of a beast that is both bound by nature and yet capable of transcending it. And perhaps that is why, even when we know the laws of physics, the dream of the flying dragon still clings to us. Because it is not merely a question of aerodynamics, it is a vision of freedom, of power unchained by gravity, of something greater than ourselves claiming dominion over earth and sky alike. The wings of stone may never truly have borne such a creature aloft, but in the human imagination, they always will. Dragons are rarely described as wandering the open plains. Across myths, they are denizens of shadowed spaces, caves, mountain crags, volcanic pits, and forgotten underground tunnels. These lairs are more than mere hiding places. They are theaters of power, designed to evoke awe and terror. But there is a deeper reason these habitats appear in legend. They mirror the natural structures of our planet, places that inspire both fear and fascination. Consider the cave. Its dark interior, echoing with every sound, makes small footsteps sound monstrous. Temperature and humidity create a space that feels alive, almost breathing. Stalactites hang like daggers. The uneven floor conceals hazards. In the minds of ancient humans, caves were gateways to other worlds, entrances to the unknown. A creature of immense size, lurking in such a place, would be both plausible and terrifying. Volcanoes, too, are central to dragon myth. From Iceland to Japan, volcanic eruptions have shaped landscapes and cultures alike. In Iceland, sagas tell of fiery serpents dwelling within the molten earth, their heat and smoke visible from the surface. Travelers and villagers witnessed geysers, lava flows, and smoke plumes rising unpredictably from the ground, and these phenomena were often explained as the movements of hidden dragons. The earth itself seemed alive, and legends grew around these geological wonders. Mountains provide another compelling habitat. They are difficult to reach, naturally fortified, and often harbor caves or cliffs that seem designed for a beast of immense size. From the Alps to the Himalayas, towering peaks inspire awe. A dragon perched on a high crag becomes a natural sentinel, observing valleys and controlling the surrounding land. In such locations, myth and reality intertwine. A snow leopard or golden eagle may occupy these heights, yet human imagination elevated these sightings to dragons, scaling up their size and ferocity. But why do humans consistently place dragons in such dramatic landscapes? The answer may lie in survival psychology. Ancient humans were attuned to danger and uncertainty. Dark caves could harbor predators. Volcanic smoke could signal an impending eruption. These spaces demanded respect and caution. To personify danger as a dragon was a way to encode environmental wisdom. Tales of fire, teeth, and wings became warnings embedded in culture. Some micro-stories illustrate this connection vividly. In Iceland, for instance, folklore describes the Lagarflight serpent, a creature dwelling near a volcanic river. Locals attributed unusual fogs, eruptions, and river surges to its movements underground. While these accounts were mythologized, they reflected real geological activity. The dragon, in this sense, was a living metaphor for the unpredictable and dangerous processes of the earth itself. Caves, volcanoes, and mountains share common characteristics. They are acoustically resonant, thermally active, and visually imposing. Shadows stretch unnaturally. Temperatures fluctuate rapidly. Minerals glint like gold in torchlight. In these conditions, a large creature becomes imaginable. Humans may have glimpsed bears, big cats, or even large birds in these habitats, and then projected the dragon onto them, amplifying size, fire, and wingspan. Consider also the practical advantages a dragon might need in such habitats. Caves and overhangs provide shelter from the elements, concealment from humans and other predators, and structural support from massive bodies. Volcanoes offer heat that could theoretically sustain large metabolism, or provide an origin for fire breath myths. Mountains supply vantage points, a natural stage from which dragons could dominate the landscape and enforce the notion of their power. The underground lair motif is also psychologically compelling. Descending into darkness represents a journey into the unconscious, the hidden, and the dangerous. Dragons in caves are not merely physical threats. They are symbols of fear, greed, and the unknown. Collecting treasure, hoarding knowledge, or guarding sacred spaces, dragons function as guardians of human anxiety, as well as human aspiration. Even today, explorers entering remote volcanic caves or deep mountain tunnels feel the echo of these ancient fears. The way sound bounces, the smell of sulfur, the faint heat and darkness, all evoke the presence of something immense and unseen. It is easy to imagine a winged, fire-breathing creature inhabiting these places, even if reality contains nothing more than bats, geothermal gases, or rock formations. In many cultures, the subterranean dragon is a bridge between worlds. It connects the visible world of humans with hidden natural forces. Lava flows, geysers, earthquakes, and cave collapses could all be interpreted as the movements of a colossal underground being. By placing dragons in these habitats, myths encode an awareness of natural hazards, creating cautionary stories that persist for generations. The echoes of real habitats in dragon mythology are therefore striking. Every cave, cliff, and volcanic vent in legend corresponds to a feature of the physical world that is dramatic, unpredictable, and imposing. Humans projected dragons into these landscapes not randomly, but in response to the power and danger inherent in them. The myth and the earth are intertwined, the imaginary dragon anchored in the reality of rock, fire, and shadow. And yet, there remains a tantalizing possibility. Could creatures resembling dragons have once existed, occupying these remote and extreme habitats, only to vanish before humans could fully record them? Perhaps in deep caves or isolated mountains, a large predator could remain hidden for generations, leaving only whispers, scorch marks, or glimpses in the corner of an eye. Such speculation blurs the line between imagination and possibility, between geological hazard and living terror. Ultimately, the dragon's lair is more than a setting. It is a symbol of mystery, danger, and hidden knowledge. Mountains, volcanoes, and caves provide both narrative and environmental justification for the creature's mythic presence. In the patterns of earth and stone, humans saw echoes of creatures too immense to survive in open fields, and yet perfectly at home in places shaped by fire, shadow, and gravity. Perhaps dragons never roamed the skies from these lairs. Perhaps they were always a projection of human awe and fear. And yet, the habitats themselves, the caves, the molten vents, the high crags, continue to inspire stories, keeping the dragon alive in the mind. In the echoes of underground halls and the smoke of distant volcanoes, we find the traces of a creature that may never have existed, yet remains unmistakably real in legend. The dragon's lair is, in every sense, a place where nature and myth meet, where the human imagination gives shape to the hidden forces of the earth. Across continents and centuries, one motif recurs in dragon mythology with almost universal consistency: the dragon's hoard. Mountains of gold, piles of glittering gems, treasure chests stuffed with silver, all fiercely guarded by a single massive fire-breathing creature. But why do dragons love treasure? Why does mythology so persistently link these creatures with wealth and valuables? To answer this, we must consider both human psychology and natural behavior. First, treasure hoarding in legend can be seen as a metaphor for power. Gold and jewels have long represented status, security, and influence. A dragon, by amassing wealth, becomes the ultimate symbol of dominance. The hoard is more than money. It is a statement, an embodiment of the dragon's might and mastery over the land it inhabits. Humans, in turn, see the dragon as a creature of greed and authority, its wealth a measure of its danger. Yet mythology may also reflect patterns found in the animal kingdom. Certain birds, like magpies and bowerbirds, are naturally attracted to shiny objects. Bowerbirds, for instance, collect colorful trinkets to decorate elaborate structures that serve as mating displays. Magpies are drawn to glittering items, often taking coins, foil, or jewelry back to their nests. The fascination with reflective surfaces is instinctive, a response to novelty, aesthetics, or territorial display. Could dragons have evolved similar tendencies? Imagine a massive predator with intelligence rivaling primates. Its instincts might include a compulsion to gather objects that indicate status, strength, or territorial control. Shiny metals and gemstones could serve as signals, much like bright plumage or elaborate nests. A dragon's hoard would then be a natural extension of survival behavior. Attract mates, assert dominance, or mark territory. Legends also give psychological weight to treasure hoarding. In the Western imagination, dragons guard gold not only for wealth, but for human greed. Heroes seeking riches are forced to confront danger, courage, and morality. The hoard becomes a storytelling device, a measure of virtue or folly. In this sense, the treasure is less about the dragon than about the human encounter. It externalizes risk, desire, and ambition in a tangible form, giving stories a moral dimension that resonates across generations. In Eastern traditions, dragons are sometimes depicted with pearls or gems of wisdom. Here, the treasure is symbolic rather than material. It represents knowledge, prosperity, or spiritual power, reinforcing the dragon as a guardian of cosmic order rather than mere greed. The hoard becomes a manifestation of abundance, protection, and divine authority. From a biological perspective, large predators often require high-value resources to sustain themselves. Consider apex predators such as lions or wolves. They do not collect food, but they do remember the locations of caches, ambush points, or hunting territories. If dragons were real, their intelligence could extend to storing resources, metal, stone, or food as a means of survival. In this way, the myth of the hoard may exaggerate a plausible ecological behavior, the instinct to gather, protect, and use critical resources. Even smaller creatures display similar behaviors. Squirrels bury nuts, ravens cache food, and octopuses collect shells or objects in dens. These behaviors serve practical purposes: protection, courtship, or territorial marking, but to human observers, they can appear as obsession or greed. Imagine an animal of dragon size doing the same, hoarding items that gleam or glitter. It would be impossible to ignore, and the narrative of treasure guarding would be born. Micro-stories from European folklore illustrate this vividly. In Norse sagas, dragons such as Fafnir begin as humans or dwarves who become obsessed with wealth, transforming into monstrous guardians. Here, the dragon embodies the destructive power of greed itself. The story conflates human psychology with animal instinct. The desire to protect resources becomes a literal physical transformation into a creature of overwhelming strength and ferocity. Legends also describe traps and elaborate lairs designed to protect hordes. This is consistent with natural predator behavior. Large cats, for example, often drag kills into secluded areas to avoid scavengers. Similarly, birds hide collected items from rivals or potential thieves. In the case of dragons, hoarding extends beyond food into metal and gemstone, a fantastical amplification of a real survival strategy. One theory suggests that dragons' attraction to shiny objects might have evolutionary roots in prey recognition or camouflage. Bright surfaces could catch light in cave interiors, alerting a predator to movement. Over time, curiosity and reward might reinforce this behavior, gradually evolving into the sophisticated hoarding seen in myth. Psychologically, humans project their own desires onto the dragon. Gold is universally valuable, representing safety, wealth, and immortality. To see a creature guarding treasure is to confront our own ambitions and fears. The dragon becomes both mirror and cautionary figure. It reflects the allure of wealth and the consequences of obsession. Heroes enter the lair not just to slay the beast, but to wrest control of desire itself. And yet, if we imagine dragons as real, intelligent creatures, the hoard could serve multiple practical and social purposes: signaling strength, attracting mates, marking territory, and storing critical resources. The behavior is consistent with what we observe in nature, amplified to fit the scale and cognition of a mythical apex predator. In the end, the dragon's hoard is more than gold and gems. It is a convergence of biology, psychology, and culture. It is the manifestation of instinct, intelligence, and imagination. It reflects survival strategies found in the natural world, amplified through human storytelling into something extraordinary. Whether as metaphor, moral lesson, or evolutionary speculation, the image of the dragon guarding treasure persists because it resonates with something fundamental: the intertwining of desire, danger, and power. And it reminds us that even in the most fantastical myths, we often find the echoes of real-world behavior and instinct. The dragon's hoard is ultimately both real and imagined. It is a warning and a wonder, a symbol of power, and perhaps a glimpse into how intelligence and instinct might combine in a creature far beyond our ordinary experience. In the glittering reflection of gold and gems, we see the dragon itself, and perhaps a reflection of ourselves. Across centuries, dragons have been cast as ultimate adversaries, monsters to be slain, threats to villages, guardians of treasure, and embodiments of chaos itself. Equally persistent are the stories of those who faced them: heroes, knights, and legendary warriors who rose to the challenge. Tales of St. George, Beowulf, Siegfried, and countless unnamed champions have become part of our cultural DNA. But were these purely allegorical tales, or could they be distorted echoes of encounters with creatures that once walked or soared the earth? St. George, perhaps the most iconic dragon slayer in Western mythology, is traditionally depicted riding a horse, lance in hand, confronting a fire-breathing serpent near a village. In some versions, the dragon demanded tribute or human sacrifices, and George intervened to save the innocent. At first glance, the story reads as a Christian allegory: good versus evil, divine providence triumphing over chaos. Yet the specificity of the narrative, the geography, the lair, even the creature's behavior, hints at a memory of something real, magnified by imagination over generations. Beowulf, the Geatish hero of Anglo-Saxon legend, confronts a dragon late in life. Unlike St. George's more episodic adventure, this is a slow, tragic confrontation. The dragon attacks the mead hall of the hero's kingdom, driven by the theft of a single cup from its hoard. Here, we find an interplay of human motivation and monstrous instinct, greed, territoriality, and vengeance projected onto a creature that is at once fantastical and biologically plausible. The dragon guards a cache of treasure, reacts predictably to disturbance, and confronts the intruder with overwhelming force. Could this narrative stem from exaggerated encounters with large predators, or even memory of prehistoric creatures? Siegfried, the dragon slayer of Germanic epic, adds another layer of complexity. His confrontation with Fafnir is rich with symbolic detail. Siegfried kills the dragon to claim its hoard, bathes in its blood, and gains invincibility. Here, the dragon is both guardian and source of ultimate power. The story intertwines moral lessons, heroism, and transformation. It also reflects an intuitive understanding of apex predator behavior. Dragons strike with ferocity when threatened, and their lairs, hidden, formidable, often perilous, serve as perfect traps for the unwary. Micro-stories from diverse cultures share similar motifs. The hero enters a dangerous space, confronts a powerful, often winged predator, and emerges transformed. In Japan, Yamada no Aoshi is an 8-headed dragon defeated by the storm god Susanoo. In India, the Naga are serpentine guardians, sometimes slain, sometimes placated. In all these narratives, the hunter's confrontation reflects an understanding of strategy, preparation, and respect for the predator, an awareness consistent with real-world encounters with dangerous animals. Could these tales be distorted accounts of encounters with creatures that were real, yet now lost to time? Perhaps early humans, facing large reptiles, crocodiles, or even unknown species, translated those experiences into myth. A crocodile or monitor lizard could easily inspire the image of a scaled, deadly guardian. Fossil discoveries may have influenced memory as well. Ancient bones of massive reptiles might have been interpreted as remains of dragons. their enormous size feeding the imagination of storytellers. The act of hunting the dragon also conveys lessons about human courage and strategy. Legends consistently describe preparation, observation, and the use of tools or clever tactics. St. George uses a lance. Beowulf wields a sword. Siegfried exploits vulnerability, bathing in dragon's blood to gain advantage. In all cases, heroism is not brute force alone. It is intelligence, patience, and understanding of the creature's behavior. This mirrors reality. Predators are rarely defeated by rash attacks, and survival depends on knowledge of the enemy. Symbolically, dragon slaying addresses the confrontation with fear itself. Dragons often inhabit liminal spaces, mountains, caves, forests, places humans regard as dangerous or unknown. To defeat a dragon is to assert order over chaos, to confront mortality, and to master what is otherwise beyond control. These stories encode psychological truths as much as moral ones. Even if dragons never existed, the narrative fulfills a human need to externalize and conquer fear. Folklore also preserves ecological memory. A dragon's lair, its hoard, its patterns of aggression, and its response to intrusion often mirror real predator behaviors. Eagles, bears, crocodiles, and large snakes exhibit defensive behaviors when their territory is threatened or when food stores are approached. Legends amplify these behaviors to monumental scale, creating the dragon, a creature that embodies the extremes of predation, territoriality, and danger. Interestingly, dragon-slaying myths often include consequences or transformation. Beowulf dies even after killing the dragon. Siegfried gains invincibility, but is ultimately betrayed. The slaying is never uncomplicated. This may reflect a subconscious acknowledgement of risk. Even when humans overcome a threat, there are costs, physical or moral, in engaging with forces larger than themselves. Some stories suggest collaboration rather than solo heroism. Villagers, fellow warriors, or allies assist in subduing dragons. This mirrors real-world survival. Early humans could rarely tackle dangerous predators alone. The hero becomes a symbolic figure for collective action, strategy, and courage under extreme pressure. Could there also be an evolutionary angle? Perhaps early humans, encountering apex predators or large reptiles, projected intelligence, cunning, and malice onto them. Over generations, oral traditions transformed real encounters into narratives of dragons and heroes. The act of dragon slaying may represent an early form of ecological storytelling, encoding memory of actual risks while shaping societal norms, heroism, and cultural values. Finally, consider the enduring appeal of dragon hunters. The motif transcends time and geography because it resonates deeply. It embodies the human desire to confront danger, claim mastery, and achieve transformation. Even today, the dragon hunter archetype inspires literature, film, and games. The thrill of facing the impossible, the confrontation with a being larger, older, and more powerful than oneself, continues to capture the imagination. Whether allegory or memory of real confrontations, dragon hunters reflect a blend of psychology, ecology, and storytelling. They are mirrors of human courage, intelligence, and ambition, shaped by the creatures they face, creatures that, in myth, defy reason yet feel tangible, almost plausible. Ultimately, the tales of St. George, Beowulf, and Siegfried remind us that dragons, real or imagined, are more than monsters. They are tests, teachers, and mirrors. In confronting them, humans confront themselves, their fears, desires, and the limits of their courage. The dragon hunter survives, but only in story, in memory, and in the echoes of imagination that keep dragons alive long after their shadows have vanished. The hunter and the hunted are entwined, forever locked in a dance across time, myth, and culture. Dragons may never have walked the earth as fire-breathing beasts, but through their hunters, they continue to roam the human mind, guarding the treasures of courage, fear, and the unknown. In the East, dragons are unlike the heavy, fire-breathing monsters of Western legend. They are long, serpentine, and often linked to water rather than fire. Rivers, lakes, clouds, and storms are their domains. Chinese, Japanese, and Korean myths describe dragons as elegant, sinuous beings capable of flight without wings, ruling the skies and waterways, and influencing rainfall, fertility, and prosperity. These sky serpents are revered rather than feared, embodiments of life-giving forces and cosmic balance. The Chinese dragon, or long, is perhaps the most iconic. It is depicted with a flowing, elongated body, clawed feet, and a head crowned with antler-like horns. Unlike Western dragons, it is often wingless, yet it soars through clouds, dances along rivers, and coils around mountains. Its role is protective. It controls rain, governs rivers, and ensures agricultural abundance. Temples, festivals, and imperial symbolism all celebrate its benevolent power. Japanese myths offer variations on this theme. The Ryer shares many characteristics with the Chinese dragon, often tied to bodies of water and rainfall. Folktales recount dragons as guardians of sacred springs or rivers, shaping the landscape, protecting fishermen, or granting blessings to villages. Korean dragons, or yong, blend these attributes with their own cultural nuances, emphasizing authority, longevity, and moral guidance. Across Asia, dragons are rarely simple beasts. They are intertwined with life, land, and human culture. But could these myths have been inspired by real creatures? Fossil evidence and paleontological studies suggest the possibility. Giant snakes, monitor lizards, and crocodiles were once widespread across Asia. Imagine encountering a large python or an ancient crocodile in a winding river valley. Its sinuous form, powerful movement, and occasional aggressive displays could easily inspire the imagination. A creature partially submerged, visible only in flashes, would seem otherworldly. Rivers themselves play a critical role in shaping the dragon myth. Observing water currents, flooding, and seasonal changes, early humans may have associated long, flowing bodies of water with serpentine creatures. Torrential floods could be seen as the dragon stirring, while calmer stretches indicated appeasement. In this way, the dragon becomes a living metaphor for natural forces, unpredictable, essential, and awe-inspiring. Some theories speculate on yet undiscovered species. Asia is home to remote river systems, dense forests, and deep caves habitats where elusive creatures could persist, largely hidden from human observation. The Mekong, Yangtze, and Ganges, along with remote mountain streams, could have harbored species large enough to inspire tales of living dragons. Perhaps ancient humans glimpsed unknown reptiles, enormous eels, or serpentine amphibians that were later mythologized. The biology of the sky serpents is intriguing. Many myths describe them as capable of both swimming and flying, a duality that is difficult for modern science to reconcile. Could a long, flexible body, dense with musculature, support gliding or short bursts of aerial movement? Some speculate that dragons relied on air currents and thermal updrafts, lifting their serpentine forms in a manner similar to modern flying snakes. These snakes flatten their bodies and undulate through the air for short distances. Could myths exaggerate a real evolutionary adaptation, scaled up to monumental proportions? Micro-stories from the East illustrate this dual nature. In one Chinese tale, the dragon Longmu's dragon children protect their village's river, ensuring a bountiful harvest. In Japanese lore, the eight-headed Orochi terrorizes a region, only to be subdued by a cunning hero, highlighting a balance between fear and respect. These stories reveal an intimate understanding of animal behavior. Dragons respond to stimuli, exhibit territoriality, and possess intelligence. Such details suggest that mythmakers observed living creatures, then magnified their traits through narrative. Symbolism also plays a profound role. In Eastern thought, Dragons embody harmony, wisdom, and cosmic order. Their serpentine forms evoke flexibility, adaptability, and endurance. Their connection to water reflects fertility and life-sustaining power, contrasting sharply with the destructive, horde-obsessed dragons of the West. This cultural interpretation highlights a key principle. Mythology is not just memory of past encounters. It is a framework for understanding the world, integrating observation, psychology, and spiritual philosophy. Could these dragons have had evolutionary reasons for their characteristics? A long, limber body is ideal for navigating rivers and dense foliage. A powerful tail aids swimming and balance. Horned heads or spiny ridges could serve as defense against predators. If early humans saw a creature with these features, alive and capable of striking from water or air, it would leave a lasting impression, forming the basis for stories passed through generations. Rain, storms, and seasonal floods further reinforce the link between dragons and rivers. Sudden downpours, lightning strikes, and river surges were interpreted as manifestations of the dragon's mood. Appeasing the dragon through rituals, offerings, or festivals became a way to manage environmental uncertainty. In this sense, dragons functioned as both psychological and ecological regulator symbols that helped humans navigate risk and understand forces beyond their control. The scale of these myths is also remarkable. While Western dragons are massive and imposing, Eastern dragons combine size with elegance and fluidity. Their movements through air and water emphasize grace rather than brute force. This distinction may reflect the different environments and survival pressures. Dense river valleys, fertile plains, and mountainous terrain favor agility and intelligence over sheer mass. Yet the mystery remains. Fossil evidence, large reptiles, and unusual animal behavior could explain some origins of these myths, but nothing fully accounts for the dragon's full scope, their intelligence, longevity, and supernatural abilities. Perhaps they are composites, an amalgamation of observed creatures, exaggerated memory, and the human desire to understand and control nature. Ultimately, Asia's sky serpents endure because they represent a unique blend of reality and imagination. They are waterborne and airborne, fierce yet benevolent, living embodiments of the forces that shaped human life. They remind us that myth can encode observation, speculation, and reverence, preserving a vision of creatures that are, in a sense, both real and impossible. In rivers, clouds, and mountains across China, Japan, and Korea, the dragons of legend continue to glide. Whether inspired by giant snakes, crocodiles, or merely the human mind's capacity for wonder, they remain living serpents in our imagination, timeless, elegant, and eternal. Across the vast landscapes of Mesoamerica, dragons appear not as fire-breathing hoarders, but as feathered serpents, divine beings intertwined with sky, earth, and water. Chief among these is Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of the Aztec and Toltec civilizations, a deity whose body merges the lithe, sinuous form of a serpent with the vibrant plumage of a bird. He is creator, windbringer, and cultural hero, his image carved in temples, etched on codices, and celebrated in ritual. But how did ancient peoples conceive of such creatures? Could these myths have been inspired by real animals, or were they purely symbolic, representing the heavens and the natural world? The concept of the feathered serpent is remarkably consistent across cultures in the region. Among the Maya, Kukulkan mirrors Quetzalcoatl, a winged serpent that descends from the skies to impart knowledge and blessing. Statues and reliefs show a long, scaled body adorned with feathers, undulating in patterns that suggest both flight and serpentine movement. These depictions emphasize the duality of the creature, simultaneously grounded and airborne, reptilian yet avian, a bridge between earth and sky. One possibility is that the imagery originates from observation of real animals. Mesoamerica was home to large reptiles, giant lizards, iguanas, and perhaps extinct species of monitor lizards or crocodilians. Even the presence of snakes, some of formidable size, could inspire the notion of elongated, powerful bodies capable of striking with precision. The addition of feathers may have been a symbolic enhancement, merging traits of birds that soar through the skies and reptiles that slither through rivers and jungles. Birds themselves play a critical role in this synthesis. Quetzal feathers, prized for their iridescent beauty, were sacred and often incorporated into headdresses and ceremonial objects. The brilliant colors of these feathers could have been attributed to a divine creature, imagined as a snake endowed with the iridescence of tropical plumage. Combining the sinuous form of a serpent with the aerial qualities of a bird creates a being that is at once natural and supernatural. Astronomy may also have influenced these myths. Mesoamerican civilizations closely observed the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. The feathered serpent is frequently linked to celestial events rising and setting along solar paths, marking equinoxes or symbolizing cosmic cycles. The undulating body of Quetzalcoatl may mirror the movement of celestial serpents across the night sky, connecting human observation of the heavens with terrestrial mythology. These deities also demonstrate intelligence, moral authority, and creativity qualities not typically associated with real reptiles. But there is evidence that early humans anthropomorphized animals to convey cultural lessons. A dangerous predator becomes a symbol of vigilance. A bird of prey becomes wisdom. A river serpent embodies fertility. Quetzalcoatl may represent an amalgamation of these traits: the physicality of large snakes and lizards, the mobility of birds, and the symbolic essence of cosmic and cultural order. Micro-stories provide additional context. In one legend, Quetzalcoatl descends to teach humanity agriculture, writing, and arts, guiding civilization from ignorance to knowledge. In another, he battles malevolent forces, protecting balance in the cosmos. Unlike Western dragons, these feathered serpents are rarely embodiments of pure evil. They are guardians, teachers, and agents of transformation. Their wings and feathers emphasize freedom, ascension, and connection to divine realms. Could there have been real creatures that inspired these stories? While no evidence points to a true feathered, serpentine dragon in Mesoamerica, fossil discoveries suggest the existence of large reptiles and birds coexisting in the same regions. Giant pterosaurs or prehistoric snakes may have survived long enough to leave impressions on early human observers. The combination of reptilian and avian features in myth could be an intuitive extrapolation. Humans witnessing large, agile predators, then imagining what might occur if flight and intelligence were added. The feathered serpent also reflects environmental and ecological awareness. Rivers, lakes, and tropical forests dominate Mesoamerican landscapes. A serpent-like creature navigating waterways, capable of gliding or leaping between trees, resonates with patterns observed in real animals. By integrating feathers, the myth allows the creature to traverse multiple domains: air, land, and water. Quetzalcoatl becomes a master of the ecosystem, a being that embodies adaptability and balance. Interestingly, the symbolic emphasis on feathers and flight may mirror the culture's aspirations. Flight suggests transcendence, freedom, and the ability to navigate between worlds, the mortal and the divine, earth and sky. A creature that combines serpentine cunning with avian grace embodies both practical wisdom and spiritual elevation. Humans, in turn, are inspired to emulate or respect these qualities, internalizing lessons on leadership, creativity, and harmony with nature. The motif of the feathered serpent also emphasizes duality: creation and destruction, water and air, wisdom and power. Quetzalcoatl brings fertility through rainfall, yet his serpent form reminds us of danger and unpredictability. This balance mirrors the delicate interplay of ecosystems in tropical regions, where survival depends on respecting predators, rivers, and seasonal changes. The myth encodes practical observation as poetic narrative. Some scholars suggest the possibility of ritualized memory shaping the creature's features. Ancient people may have combined observations of snakes, crocodiles, birds, and celestial patterns into a composite image, then reinforced it through generations of storytelling, art, and ceremony. In this way, Quetzalcoatl is both an imaginative creation and a cultural archive, preserving ecological, astronomical, and social knowledge in the guise of a mythic being. Ultimately, the feathered serpent is more than a fantastical monster. It represents human ingenuity in interpreting the natural world, blending observed phenomena with symbolic meaning. It bridges domains, teaching lessons about morality, survival, and the rhythms of nature. Its wings and feathers allow it to transcend ordinary experience, while its serpentine body roots it in tangible reality. In the forests, rivers, and skies of ancient Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent lives on not as a physical creature, but as an enduring symbol of intelligence, adaptability, and cosmic connection. Whether inspired by giant lizards, exotic birds, or celestial patterns, Quetzalcoatl and his kin remind us that dragons, in every form, are as much reflections of human perception as they are of nature itself. The myths endure because they capture something essential: the interplay of fear, admiration, and wonder. Feathered serpents are not merely monsters. They are teachers, guardians, and messengers between worlds. And in contemplating them, we glimpse both the ingenuity of ancient cultures and the endless fascination humanity holds for creatures that defy the boundaries of the real and the imagined. In the icy reaches of Scandinavia, dragons appear as fiery, apocalyptic forces, harbingers of chaos and destruction. Norse mythology gives us vivid examples: Fafnir, the cursed dragon hoarding treasure, and Jarmungandr, the world-encircling serpent whose release signals Ragnarok, the end of the world. Unlike the benevolent or water-linked dragons of the East, these creatures embody fire, death, and cosmic upheaval. But what inspired such stories? Could volcanic eruptions, auroral displays, or even meteor strikes have been interpreted as dragon fire by observers of the distant past? Fafnir's tale begins in greed and transformation. Once a dwarf, he becomes a dragon to guard his hoard of gold, his body taking on reptilian and monstrous qualities. The description of his breath and the devastation he causes echoes natural phenomena: sudden volcanic smoke, molten lava, or fires sweeping through forests. The association of heat and danger with a supernatural being may have arisen from humanity's need to explain inexplicable and terrifying events. Jarmungandr, the Midgard serpent, is vast, encircling the world's oceans, poised to release chaos during Ragnarok. Sailors and coastal communities may have interpreted massive storms, tidal surges, or whirlpools as evidence of a colossal sea-dwelling creature. Its fire may not have been literal, but symbolic of the destructive energy of nature itself. Northern lights, with their eerie, shifting glow, could have been seen as the flickering flames of a sky serpent, bridging celestial and terrestrial phenomena in the imagination. Volcanic activity offers a compelling natural analog. Iceland, Norway, and other volcanic regions of the north experience eruptions that spew smoke, lava, and ash into the sky. From a distance, the fiery glow and rising clouds could appear as a living, destructive force. A dragon's breath may have been a metaphorical interpretation of molten rivers carving through the land, consuming everything in their path. Communities lacking scientific understanding would naturally encode these events in myth. Auroras, too, contribute to the imagery of fire in the sky. The northern lights flicker in hues of green, red, and gold, painting the heavens with dynamic, undulating shapes. To observers steeped in legend, these displays could easily be construed as celestial flames, the breath of dragons swirling across the firmament. Such phenomena reinforce the notion that dragons were not only terrestrial predators, but cosmic forces tied to storms, celestial cycles, and impending doom. Meteor strikes may also have left their mark on Norse dragon lore. Bolides entering the atmosphere create trails of fire, explosions, and sometimes devastating impacts. A sudden fireball streaking across the sky, followed by shockwaves or forest fires, would have been interpreted as a dragon attacking from above. Over generations, these rare but traumatic events could have crystallized into narrative motifs, embedded in sagas that describe creatures capable of incinerating villages in a single breath. Micro-stories illustrate these associations. In some Icelandic sagas, Fafnir's lair lies within mountains, seeping smoke and sulfur, a vivid reflection of volcanic imagery. The dragon's hoard lies beneath the earth, as if the treasure itself is bound to the molten forces of the planet. Heroes venturing into these spaces are not merely confronting a monster. They are entering zones of geological and elemental peril. The dragon embodies the danger, translating the unpredictable power of nature into a creature with agency and intent. Norse dragons also carry moral weight. Fafnir is a cautionary figure, consumed by greed and transformed into a monster. Jormungandr represents inevitability, the destructive forces of fate. Fire, in both cases, symbolizes both danger and transformation, purging, testing, and revealing truth. In these myths, dragons are simultaneously physical threats and moral signifiers, teaching lessons through terror as much as through narrative. The physicality of Norse dragons, massive, serpentine, and capable of immense destruction, aligns closely with natural observations. Forest fires, volcanic flows, tidal waves, and storms move with relentless force, consuming everything in their path. Humans, keen observers, yet lacking modern scientific understanding, anthropomorphize these processes into living beings, capable of thought, malice, and strategy. The dragon A's breath becomes a narrative shorthand for environmental devastation that could otherwise only be feared and endured. In this sense, Norse fire dragons are both imaginative and logical. They reflect the extreme conditions of the north: volcanic landscapes, storm-prone coasts, auroral skies, and the occasional meteor strike. They personify forces humans could not control, creating stories that encode both awe and caution. The hero who confronts such a dragon faces not only a physical challenge, but a symbolic one: the unpredictable and potentially destructive power of the natural world. Even the scale of these dragons may be tied to perception. Observers witnessing smoke plumes, lava flows, or auroral curtains could interpret them as enormous, animate beings. Oral tradition amplifies size and ferocity, transforming geological and meteorological events into living monsters that dominate the landscape and imagination alike. The Norse dragon, then, is not just a creature, it is a living record of environmental observation, mythologized over generations. Ultimately, these myths endure because they blend reality with imagination. Fire, smoke, storms, and celestial displays are woven into narratives that are vivid, morally instructive, and psychologically resonant. They remind us that dragons are not merely fantasy. They are reflections of the forces humans once struggled to comprehend. Fafnir and Jormungandr are as much elemental forces as they are monsters, embodiments of danger, greed, and fate. In the smoke of volcanoes, in the flicker of northern lights, and in the scars of ancient meteor impacts, the Norse fire dragon lives on. It is a creature born of observation, amplified by fear, and immortalized by storytelling. The myths carry the memory of phenomena too immense to ignore, too powerful to confront directly, and too dramatic to forget. The fire-breathing dragon of the north, then, is a bridge between the human mind and the fury of nature, between myth and reality, between legend and the elemental forces that shape the world. It is a reminder that even in the harshest, most unforgiving landscapes, humans have always sought to understand, narrate, and humanize the mysteries around them, giving breath, teeth, and wings to the forces that awe and terrify us. In the pages of the Bible, dragons appear not by name, but in the terrifying, awe-inspiring forms of Leviathan and Behemoth. Leviathan, a sea monster wrapped in scales and fire, thrashes through the depths, impervious to human weaponry. Behemoth, described as a colossal land beast, grazes near rivers, its strength unmatched, its bones like bars of iron. These creatures are often interpreted as allegories of divine power, chaos, and judgment. Yet some scholars and cryptozoologists have wondered, could these biblical dragons be memories of real, long-extinct megafauna glimpsed by ancient observers? Leviathan is frequently depicted as a serpent or dragon of the sea, capable of incinerating its foes with breath or flame. Job 41 provides a vivid description: armored scales, impenetrable hide, eyes like the dawn, and breath that sets coals ablaze. At first glance, the creature seems fantastical. Yet some theorists suggest that Leviathan may have been inspired by whales, crocodiles, giant squids, or even prehistoric marine reptiles, whose fossils or occasional sightings survived in oral tradition. Consider the giant mosasaurs of the late Cretaceous, massive serpentine predators with powerful tails, formidable jaws, and scales that would have glinted in sunlight. Though extinct by the time humans recorded biblical texts, the memory of their bones or stories of large aquatic predators could have inspired such imagery. Behemoth, by contrast, is terrestrial, described in Job 40 as a massive herbivore with unparalleled strength. Its tail is said to sway like a cedar, and it grazes near rivers, confident in its dominion. Some interpret Behemoth as a hippopotamus or elephant, common to the ancient Near East. Yet the biblical description emphasizes size and power beyond any modern animal, suggesting that oral memory may have exaggerated real creatures, or that early humans witnessed large, now extinct herbivores, such as giant prehistoric bison or megafauna like Paraceratherium. These creatures' size, strength, and presence along waterways could easily have been mythologized into Behemoth. The duality of Leviathan and Behemoth reflects a recurring theme in dragon mythology: chaos versus order, water versus land, destruction versus sustenance. Leviathan dominates the seas, embodying danger, unpredictability, and divine might. Behemoth dominates the land, representing strength, stability, and life-giving force. Together, they symbolize the extremes of creation forces too immense and powerful for humans to control, demanding respect, awe, and moral reflection. Micro-stories within the text further illustrate these creatures' roles. Leviathan is not merely a monster to be slain. It is a demonstration of God's power, a creature humans cannot subdue. Its defeat is impossible for mortals, emphasizing divine supremacy. Behemoth, grazing peacefully, also reflects divine order, a testament to God's ability to create creatures of unmatched majesty. These narratives intertwine theology with natural observation, suggesting that the authors were as much cataloging natural marvels as crafting moral allegory. Could Leviathan and Behemoth have been inspired by fossilized remains? Archaeological findings indicate that large, bones often misinterpreted or seen without understanding, could be the origin of many dragon-like myths. A massive rib, jawbone, or a vertebra of a prehistoric whale or terrestrial megafauna would have been impossible to explain without reference to enormous creatures, feeding the imagination of early societies. Oral traditions then amplified the size, power, and supernatural traits of these animals, turning memory into legend. The fire-breathing aspect of Leviathan may reflect natural phenomena. Submarine volcanic vents, sudden methane eruptions, or bioluminescent displays could be misinterpreted as creatures emitting heat or light. Even the foam and waves produced by whales or giant sea reptiles could be exaggerated into descriptions of a fiery, destructive presence. Ancient storytellers encoded these phenomena into narratives, that made sense within their worldview: powerful, godlike, and dangerous. The descriptions of Behemoth, with bones like bars of iron and immense strength, also align with the skeletal remains of extinct giants. Imagine discovering the fossilized leg of a prehistoric mammal, so massive that no human could comprehend it. Such encounters would inspire awe, fear, and speculation, naturally giving rise to legends of monsters that walk the earth, feeding rivers and sustaining life, yet too large to threaten humans directly. Symbolically, these creatures address human attempts to understand their environment. Leviathan embodies the uncontrollable, chaotic forces of the seas, storms, and deep waters. Behemoth represents terrestrial abundance, the strength of animals humans depend upon for food, labor, and survival. In myth, these extremes are distilled into singular, magnificent beings. They convey the magnitude of creation and the balance of nature, bridging observation, morality, and imagination. Interestingly, both creatures share qualities with dragons from other cultures. Leviathan's armored scales echo the Western dragon's fireproof hide. Behemoth's massive, lumbering form mirrors the colossal land dragons of European myth. Even the moral and symbolic lessons, caution, respect, and awe are consistent across cultures. This suggests that humans everywhere have translated encounters with large, powerful creatures into narratives that teach, warn, and inspire. The biblical dragons also emphasize the human relationship with the divine. Leviathan cannot be subdued by human strength alone. Only God can control or destroy it. Behemoth, though magnificent, coexists peacefully with humans when respected. These dynamics reinforce the idea that dragons, real or imagined, serve as mirrors for human humility, morality, and recognition of forces beyond our control. From a paleontological perspective, it is possible that memory of megafauna shaped these myths. Fossils of whales, crocodiles, giant reptiles, and prehistoric mammals would have persisted across generations, embedded in oral traditions, and eventually codified in sacred texts. Combined with observation of living animals, these memories could crystallize into descriptions of creatures that defy natural limits, blending reality with the supernatural. In the end, Leviathan and Behemoth endure not merely as monsters, but as symbols of power, creation, and the limits of human understanding. They embody the tension between fear and admiration, destruction and sustenance, chaos and order. Their dragon-like qualities, immense size, overwhelming strength, and near imperviousness ensure that they remain among the most memorable creatures in human mythology. Whether as literal beasts, distorted recollections of megafauna, or allegorical constructs, Leviathan and Behemoth continue to capture the imagination. They remind us that dragons, in every culture, serve as vessels for human awe, symbols of nature's extremes, reflections of divine authority, and mirrors of our deepest fears and aspirations. In contemplating these biblical monsters, we see the fusion of observation, memory, and morality, creating creatures that are simultaneously real in impact and unreal in form. Leviathan and Behemoth, like all dragons, challenge the boundary between myth and history, urging us to ponder what might have truly walked, swum, or soared the ancient earth. Not all dragons are born purely of imagination. Sometimes, what seems monstrous and legendary has a root firmly planted in reality. Across history, countless dragon sightings can be traced to real animals, fossilized bones, and natural phenomena misinterpreted by humans unfamiliar with their scale, form, or behavior. Consider the Komodo dragon, the largest living lizard in the world. Native to a few Indonesian islands, these formidable reptiles can grow over 3 meters in length. Early explorers, encountering them without context, could easily exaggerate their size and danger. Imagine seeing one from a distance, its powerful tail swinging, jaws lined with sharp teeth, and tongue flickering an image quickly magnified in oral tailies into a fire-breathing predator or a creature guarding treasure. monitor lizards beyond the Komodo species also play a role. In Southeast Asia and Africa, these long-bodied, muscular reptiles often dwell near water, move with surprising speed, and occasionally display aggressive behaviors when threatened. A sighting in dim light or mist could inspire descriptions of sinuous dragons, capable of both swimming and striking with lethal precision. Their scales glinting in sunlight or moonlight only add to the illusion of supernatural armor. Fossilized remains are another powerful source of dragon inspiration. Large rib cages, vertebrae, or skulls from prehistoric whales, marine reptiles, or giant fish often surfaced in areas inhabited by early humans. Without understanding of paleontology, such bones would appear as evidence of enormous creatures that once roamed land or sea. A single vertebra, larger than a human torso, could be interpreted as a segment of a massive serpentine body, giving rise to stories of dragons that defied all known proportions. Whale skeletons washed ashore have particularly influenced coastal legends. Their massive ribs could be imagined as dragon spines, skulls as horned or armored heads. Communities unfamiliar with whales might see these skeletal remains as proof of dragons that once ruled the oceans. Similarly, the skeletons of ichthyosaurs or plesiosaurs, preserved for millions of years, could have been exposed by erosion or riverbeds, igniting imaginations that transformed fossilized bones into living monsters. Even ordinary animals can spark myth. Snakes, especially pythons and anacondas, have long inspired dragon legends. A large constrictor, coiled around a riverbank, occasionally surfacing to breathe, could easily be described as a dragon swimming through water. The rhythmic undulation of its body resembles the serpentine motion often attributed to mythic dragons. Sightings at night or in poor visibility amplify the mystery and fear. Birds with long necks or iridescent plumage also contributed. Peacocks, cranes, herons, and exotic birds from faraway lands, when combined in oral storytelling with reptilian characteristics, could form hybrid images of dragons. For instance, long feathered wings in myth may derive from the plumage of tropical birds, exaggerating flight and grandeur beyond reality. Marine animals, too, have their part. Squid, octopuses, and even large fish can inspire dragon lore. The giant squid, rarely seen by humans, can reach lengths of up to 13 meters. Tentacles waving in ocean currents, bodies partially visible above water, could easily be imagined as appendages of a massive sea serpent or dragon. Sailors' tales, passed down for generations, often describe such encounters as encounters with creatures beyond comprehension, with fire-breathing and intelligence attributed by fear and imagination. Even natural phenomena can be mistaken for dragons. Smoke from volcanic eruptions or forest fires, auroras flickering across the night sky, and meteors streaking overhead can all be interpreted as manifestations of dragons in flight or breathing fire. When combined with sightings of large animals or fossilized remains, these elements reinforce the illusion of dragons as real, living creatures. Micro-stories from around the world illustrate these points. In China, enormous crocodiles inspired river dragon legends. In Indonesia, Komodo dragons were long feared and mythologized by locals and explorers. On the coasts of Europe, whale bones misidentified as sea serpents fed sailors' tailies. In North Africa, fossilized remains of prehistoric reptiles were sometimes embedded in myths of desert dragons. Across continents and centuries, the pattern is clear. Humans see something extraordinary and interpret it through the lens of culture, imagination, and awe. Yet this does not diminish the allure of dragons. On the contrary, the fact that real creatures could inspire myth makes dragons even more fascinating. They are born from a combination of observation, misinterpretation, and creative storytelling. Each sighting, each fossil, each encounter with a real but unusual animal contributes a thread to the tapestry of dragon mythology. In essence, Dragons are reminders of humanity's desire to explain the unknown. They are the bridge between the tangible and the imagined, the natural and the supernatural. A Komodo dragon, a whale skeleton, or a fossilized ichthyosaur may not breathe fire or guard treasure, but in human perception, they became dragons, teaching lessons about danger, awe, and the limits of knowledge. So, when we trace the lineage of dragon myths, we find not only fire and flight, but also the real-world shadows that gave them shape. Every scale, every rib, every glint in the water contributes to the legend. Dragons, it seems, exist simultaneously in the world of nature and in the imagination, reminding us that reality often seeds the most extraordinary myths. If dragons were real, the world as we know it would be profoundly different. These colossal creatures, capable of flight, immense strength, and potentially even fire, would dominate ecosystems as apex predators. Their presence would shape prey populations, alter migration patterns, and influence the evolution of other species. Understanding what a real dragon might eat and how life around it would adapt is a window into the ecological consequences of myth-made flesh. Let us imagine a dragon soaring above a forested valley. Its wings cast shadows over rivers and plains, its keen eyesight scanning for movement. What sustains such a massive creature? Large herbivores would likely form the bulk of its diet. Deer, elk, bison, or even prehistoric analogs like mammoths or giant sloths. A single dragon could consume dozens of animals in a day, creating pressure on prey species and potentially forcing them to develop new defenses or behaviors. Herds would evolve alertness, speed, and cooperation, much as African ungulates do today under the threat of lions and hyenas. Dragons' hunting strategies would depend on their anatomy. A fire-breathing dragon might scorch prey from a distance, using fire as both weapon and means of fleshing animals from cover. A non-fire dragon, relying on claws, teeth, and sheer power, would employ stealth, ambush, and aerial assault. In either case, prey species would adapt. Nocturnal activity, heightened senses, or burrowing behaviors might evolve as survival strategies. Ecosystems would shift to accommodate the predator, creating a balance where dragon and prey coexisted through constant evolutionary arms races. Rivers and wetlands would also become focal points for dragon hunting. Amphibians, fish, and waterfowl would provide supplemental nutrition, especially for smaller or younger dragons. The impact on aquatic ecosystems would be significant. Dragon predation could alter fish populations, trigger changes in plant growth due to herbivore suppression, and even influence sediment patterns through disturbance of riverbanks. Like the great predators of today, dragons would structure entire habitats around their dietary needs. Scavenging and interspecific competition would also play a role. Dragons would likely leave remnants of kills, which smaller carnivores could exploit. Wolves, eagles, and vultures might scavenge dragon kills, much as hyenas feed on lion leftovers in African savannas. In this way, dragons would not only affect their immediate prey, but also support secondary food webs, creating cascading ecological effects across multiple trophic levels. Fire introduces an additional layer of ecological complexity. If a dragon could breathe fire, forests and grasslands would face intermittent burns. While destructive, these fires could mimic natural wildfire cycles, clearing undergrowth, promoting new plant growth, and cycling nutrients into the soil. Some species might even evolve tolerance or dependence on such disturbances, establishing a co-evolutionary relationship with the dragon's hunting behaviors. In this sense, dragons could act as both predators and ecological engineers. Migration patterns of prey animals would likely be influenced by dragons as well. Herds might avoid dragon nesting sites or regions with high predation risk, leading to seasonal shifts in distribution. Certain areas could become refuges, with prey congregating in terrain unsuitable for dragons' dense forests, cliffs, or wetlands. Over millennia, These pressures could drive morphological and behavioral changes in herbivores, birds, and even smaller predators, creating an ecosystem finely tuned to the presence of these apex predators. Dragon reproduction adds further implications. Nesting behavior would likely center on remote or elevated locations, minimizing human or predator interference. Eggs would need protection from scavengers, leading to complex parental care or nesting strategies. Hatchlings, smaller and more vulnerable, would depend on stealth, speed, or group behavior to survive their early years. The presence of dragons, therefore, would influence multiple life stages, shaping entire populations from birth to maturity. Dietary diversity would vary by species. Mountain-dwelling dragons might rely heavily on large terrestrial prey, while riverine or coastal dragons would supplement with fish, crustaceans, or seabirds. Forest dragons might target both prey and fruiting plants, similar to bears, creating a broader ecological role. Each dragon species, adapted to its niche, would structure the ecosystem differently, emphasizing the complexity of predator-prey dynamics in a world shared with such extraordinary creatures. Dragons' impact on humans would be profound as well. Settlements near dragon territories would need protective strategies, from fortified villages to early warning systems. Agriculture and livestock would be particularly vulnerable, altering human migration, settlement patterns, and societal development. Dragons, like wolves or bears in human history, would become both a threat and a force shaping culture, ritual, and mythology. Survival strategies would be encoded into stories, influencing not only ecology, but civilization itself. Micro-stories from natural history hint at the plausibility of such impacts. Komodo dragons, for example, hunt large prey in groups, occasionally ambushing deer or water buffalo. Eagles and large raptors influence the behavior of smaller birds and mammals. If scaled up, a true dragon would magnify these effects exponentially, creating ecological pressure across forests, plains, rivers, and skies. Even rare encounters would have dramatic consequences for the surrounding ecosystem. Finally, the energy requirements of dragons would dictate their behavior. Massive size, sustained flight, and active predation require enormous caloric intake. Dragons might spend large portions of their day hunting, resting, or thermoregulating, much as modern apex predators do. Seasonal migration or territory rotation could become essential to avoid overexploitation of local prey populations. In this way, dragons would maintain ecological balance while simultaneously shaping it. In conclusion, imagining dragons as real predators reveals a world deeply transformed by their presence. Ecosystems would be structured around their needs. Prey species would evolve under constant pressure, and entire landscapes would bear the imprint of their hunting patterns. Fire, flight, and size would make dragons agents of destruction and creation, blending predation with environmental engineering. Dragons, if they existed, would not be isolated monsters. They would be pivotal forces in ecological networks. Their influence would extend from riverbanks to mountaintops, from forests to plains, from prey to scavenger to human civilization. In considering their diet and ecological role, we glimpse a world where myth and biology converge, where the imaginary predator leaves tangible, lasting effects on the environment. Even in absence, these speculations remind us why dragons capture the imagination. They embody the apex predator at the extreme of possibility, a creature whose biology and ecology push the limits of what we understand about life on Earth. And in this reflection, we confront the delicate balance of nature, the interplay of predator and prey, and the enduring power of myth to explore worlds that never truly existed, yet feel astonishingly real. When we trace the stories of dragons, we often turn first to the familiar European knights, Norse serpents, Chinese sky lords. But scattered across the world, in the ruins of vanished civilizations, we find echoes of dragon-like beings carved into stone, painted onto pottery, and whispered through fragmented myths. These cultures Sumer, the Indus Valley, the Mayans left behind vast legacies of art, astronomy, and architecture. Yet, buried within their remnants are clues, faint but persistent, of something stranger, gods and monsters that bear uncanny resemblance to dragons. Could it be that these forgotten civilizations preserved memories of real encounters with creatures we now call mythical? Or were their dragon gods metaphors embodied forces of nature, fear, and power? Let us step carefully into the ruins of time and listen for the voices of civilizations long gone. The story begins in Sumer, cradle of civilization on the floodplains of Mesopotamia. Among the Sumerian pantheon, we find the goddess Tiamat, a monstrous primordial being often imagined as a serpent or dragon of the seas. In the Babylonian Enuma Elish, she embodies chaos itself, slain by the storm god Marduk, who fashions the heavens from her body. Tiamat is more than myth. To the Sumerians and Babylonians, she symbolized the eternal struggle between order and chaos, civilization and wilderness. But why imagine chaos as a dragon-like serpent? Could this be a cultural memory, a retelling of terrifying encounters with immense reptiles that once roamed river valleys? Nile crocodiles, capable of reaching 20 feet, may have swum in Mesopotamian waters. Fossils of prehistoric creatures may have been unearthed by early farmers. And so, chaos took form not abstract, but alive, scaled, and tooth-filled. From the Fertile Crescent, our path turns east to the Indus Valley civilization, older than Egypt, flourishing along the rivers of modern Pakistan and India. Here, seals and carvings depict animals both real and strange. Among them, horned beasts, serpent-like figures, and composite creatures. One recurring motif is the Nga serpent deity that persisted into later Hindu and Buddhist traditions. The Nga dwelled in rivers, guarded treasures, and often took the form of massive serpents or dragons coiled beneath the earth. Some scholars argue these myths may have begun with the discovery of giant python skins, or perhaps with the real threat of cobras and other venomous snakes that commanded respect. Others see an echo of something larger creatures remembered dimly, perhaps through fossils of crocodilians that once thrived across the subcontinent. But to the Indus people, the serpent was more than animal. It was a divine guardian of fertility, of water, of life itself. In this view, the dragon god is not a destroyer, but a keeper of balance. Half a world away, in the humid jungles and towering pyramids of the Mayan civilization, dragons appear again, though by different names. Among the most striking is the feathered serpent Kukulkan, known to the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl. Unlike the fire-breathing beasts of Europe, these serpents bore feathers, wings, and celestial power. They were gods of wind, rain, knowledge, and rebirth. Why a serpent with feathers? Some scholars link the imagery to the resplendent Quetzal bird, with its shimmering green tail plumes. Others suggest the myths encode astronomical observations, the serpent's sinuous body reflecting the path of stars and planets across the heavens. But perhaps it was also more literal. Gigantic snakes, anacondas, and boa constrictors inhabited the forests of Central and South America. Imagine a Mayan hunter stumbling upon a shed skin stretching 15 or 20 feet. To see such a relic, gleaming like silver in the sun, would surely be an encounter worthy of myth. Combine it with the Quetzal's feathers, the eagle's flight, and the serpent becomes divine. Across these civilizations, a pattern emerges. Serpents, dragons, scaled gods, keepers of water, chaos, or celestial order. Were they all drawing from the same well of imagination? Or could they have preserved fragments of something real and ancient, perhaps terrifying species now lost to time? Modern scholars remind us that fossils were visible long before paleontology. Ancient people plowing fields, quarrying stone, or exploring caves would have stumbled upon giant bones massive, rib cages, tusks, and skulls weathered by time. Without the language of science, how else to explain them but as the remains of dragons and gods. Perhaps the myths were not pure invention, but interpretations and attempt to stitch fossils into the fabric of a living cosmos. But there is another possibility. What if dragons were not simply misremembered fossils, or metaphors of storms and rivers? What if they were memories? Real encounters with creatures on the margins of extinction. Imagine a time, only a few thousand years ago, when humanity still crossed paths with megafauna. When mammoths wandered the Arctic, when giant birds stalked New Zealand, when monstrous reptiles swam rivers and coasts. Could one such beast, an immense crocodile, a giant snake, or something more exotic, have survived long enough to etch itself into the memory of civilizations, shaping gods like Tiamat, Nga, and Quetzalcoatl? The timeline is not impossible. Crocodiles and snakes remain today as ancient survivors. Komodo dragons, huge monitor lizards of Indonesia, hint at what once might have been more widespread. Even pterosaurs, though extinct for millions of years, left behind fossils that could easily inspire tales of winged serpents. To walk through the ruins of Sumer, the Indus Valley, or the Mayan pyramids is to walk through the silence of civilizations that once ruled vast territories. Yet their stories linger. Their god-scaled, feathered, fire-breathing, or water-dwelling still slither through our imaginations. Dragons in these traditions are not enemies to be slain. They are cosmic forces, guardians, teachers, destroyers, and creators. They remind us that ancient people lived in awe of the natural world, its power so immense that only a dragon could embody it. Were these dragon gods memories of real beasts? Or were they mirrors of the human mind, shaped by fear and wonder? The truth lies buried in broken tablets, in stone carvings, in myths retold across millennia. But one fact is clear. Across time and across continents, from Sumer to the Indus, from the Mayan jungles to the Aztec highlands, humanity has never stopped dreaming of dragons. And perhaps that dream is itself a memory and echo of encounters long forgotten, preserved in the myths of lost civilizations. Look upward on a clear night, and the ancient stories begin to unfold. The stars may seem like fixed and silent lights, but for countless generations, humans have drawn patterns among them, constellations that served as calendars, navigation tools, and above all, myths carved into the heavens. And again, as with earth and sea, the image of the dragon appears. There is the constellation Draco, coiled eternally around the northern sky, guarding the celestial pole. Its winding form evokes a serpent stretched across eternity, a cosmic beast too vast for earthbound struggles. Why did cultures so far apart, separated by oceans and centuries, imagine dragons not just on Earth, but among the stars themselves? The answer begins with the sky's overwhelming mystery. Eclipses, meteors, and comets were frightening interruptions in the eternal order. To a farmer or sailor of the past, such events weren't just curiosities. They were omens that seemed to threaten the balance of the world. When the sun or moon darkened, when the heavens seemed to bleed or collapse, the imagination reached for monsters large enough to swallow the sky. In China, the dragon's celestial appetite was literal. The great celestial dragon was said to swallow the sun or moon, explaining the sudden disappearance during an eclipse. Communities gathered to bang drums, clang pots, and shout at the sky, hoping to frighten the dragon into spitting the light back out. This practice was not mere superstition. It was ritualized awe, a way for ordinary people to feel they had power in the face of cosmic dread. The Hindus of ancient India told of Rahu, a headless serpent demon who pursued the sun and moon across the heavens. When Rahu caught them, eclipses were born. Here again, the cosmic serpent became a way of mapping terrifying celestial mechanics onto a story that could be shared and remembered. The Norse myths offered their own astral serpent, Jarmungandr, the world serpent. Though it dwelled in the sea, coiled around Midgard, its ultimate role was tied to cosmic catastrophe. During Ragnarok, it would rise thrash, and poison the skies, blotting out the sun with venom. For the Norse, the celestial serpent was not only a starry figure, it was a reminder that the universe itself contained dangers vast and inevitable. But why serpents? Why dragons? Partly, the shape of the night sky itself invites such creatures. The constellation Draco coils across the heavens like a spine, while constellations such as Hydra slither along great arcs. To eyes unburdened by telescopes, the stars easily resembled the twisting length of a snake or the spiny back of a dragon. Beyond shape, there is symbolism. Dragons and serpents have always embodied chaos. Wherever order is threatened, whether by flood, drought, fire, or in this case, the darkening of the sky cultures, summoned up the image of a dragon to embody it. By turning these unpredictable events into the actions of a mythic beast, they gave them meaning. Instead of random terror, the eclipse became a battle. Instead of silence, there was story. The Maya of Central America also projected dragons into the stars. They imagined a celestial monster, sometimes a serpent, sometimes a crocodilian beast, stretching across the Milky Way. This cosmic creature was said to consume the sun and pour out rains. For a culture deeply tied to astronomy, the dragon was both calendar and myth, a celestial regulator of the world's balance. Even in Western tradition, echoes of this idea remain. The constellation Draco, though now a curiosity for astronomers, once symbolized Ledin, the dragon that guarded the golden apples of the Hesperides in Greek myth. The Greeks, too, looked upward and saw serpentine guardians, watching over treasures locked not in caves, but in the heavens themselves. What is striking is the universality. From China to Scandinavia, from India to the Americas, different peoples, unaware of each other, reached for the same symbol. The dragon, already a figure of power on Earth, became the embodiment of cosmic disruption above. Today, science explains eclipses as alignments of orbits, comets as icy fragments, meteors as stony debris. Yet, even armed with knowledge, we still name these events with a sense of drama blood moons, falling stars, supernova. Our words reveal how close myth still lingers. Perhaps the dragon in the stars was never meant to be taken literally. Perhaps it was always a poetic truth that the universe is vast, mysterious, and at times terrifying. And what better image to embody that truth than the dragon, a creature already larger than life, stretched to the very scale of the cosmos itself? So the next time you stand beneath the night sky, trace the winding path of Draco, or the arc of Hydra, or the shimmering length of the Milky Way. You may see only stars, but across millennia, others saw the coils of dragons, slithering silently, reminding us that even the heavens need their monsters. Beneath the surface of the earth, forces stir that are older than humanity itself. Tremors ripple through the ground. Smoke seeps from fissures. And then, with little warning, the mountain roars, spitting fire into the sky. For ancient peoples without seismology, without geology, without the quiet reassurance of science, there was only one explanation. A creature lived within the mountain, something vast, something alive, a dragon. Volcanoes are among the most awe-inspiring natural spectacles on Earth. They are also among the most terrifying. For those who lived near them, they were constant reminders of nature's power and unpredictability. The sight of glowing lava-liquid rock flowing like a fiery river must have seemed unnatural, even supernatural. And in myth after myth, across continents and cultures, the eruption of fire from the earth was attributed not to geological pressure, but to living beings. In Norse mythology, dragons and serpents were said to slumber deep underground. Jormungandr, the world serpent, lay beneath the seas, his movements causing storms and upheaval. In Iceland, where volcanoes are common, medieval stories spoke of dragons coiled in caves, breathing out noxious smoke. When the ground shook and ash blotted out the sun, it was said these creatures were awakening, stretching, and exhaling their fury. Further south, in the Mediterranean, ancient Greeks and Romans also linked fire-breathing monsters to the earth. The monster Typhon, described as a 100-headed serpent, was imprisoned beneath Mount Etna. His fiery breath was said to rise through the mountain's throat, fueling eruptions. Even today, Etna erupts frequently, as if keeping the myth alive. In Japan, dragons too were tied to volcanoes, though with a different shade of meaning. There, long-bodied serpents associated with storms and rivers could also embody the hidden energy of the earth. Some Shinto shrines near volcanic mountains still carry the symbolism of dragons as keepers of balance creatures whose anger manifested in eruptions. It is not difficult to imagine why this association formed. The breath of a dragon was fire. The breath of a volcano was fire. Both could melt stone, scorch forests, and destroy entire villages. And both seemed to come without warning. To people living in the shadow of these mountains, the dragon was not merely a symbol, but a working hypothesis, the most reasonable way to explain what their senses perceived. Volcanic gas vents also added to this imagery. In many parts of the world, mountains exhale steam and smoke from cracks in their slopes. To an ancient observer, this could only mean that something inside was alive, still breathing, even when the mountain appeared dormant. And when the vents hissed with sulfur, producing a stench like rotten eggs, the illusion of a beast's lair grew stronger. Dragons, after all, were said to live among fumes and poisonous vapors. Consider also the sound of an eruption. Modern seismographs measure shockwaves and volcanic explosions, but for those standing nearby, the noise was like the bellow of a colossal creature, thunderous, sustained, echoing across valleys. It must have felt less like the earth splitting and more like a beast roaring in pain or in rage. In Mesoamerica, volcanoes played an equally central role in myth. The Nahua people of central Mexico told of serpents beneath the earth, whose writhing gave birth to eruptions. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was a bringer of life and knowledge, but in some traditions, serpentine beings were also forces of destruction, associated with fire and smoke. The duality of dragons, creators and destroyers, mirrored the dual nature of volcanoes themselves: fertile soil from their ash, devastation from their fury. One fascinating possibility is that legends of fire-breathing dragons were not simply inspired by volcanoes, but by humanity as attempts to live with them. Imagine a community, generation after generation, watching the same mountain smolder. Parents warn their children that the dragon is restless. Shamans offer sacrifices to keep it asleep. When the inevitable eruption comes, it is not a failure of geology. It is a failure of ritual, a lapse in keeping the dragon appeased. In this way, volcano worship and dragon mythology intertwined, each reinforcing the other. Even in medieval Europe, long after natural philosophy began to erode mythical explanations, the imagery of dragons and volcanoes lingered. Travelers returning from Iceland, Italy, and other volcanic regions wrote tales of fiery serpents within the mountains. The fire they saw was undeniable. What they lacked was the framework to understand tectonic plates, magma chambers, and geothermal energy. Dragons remain the more compelling answer. From a scientific standpoint, the resemblance is uncanny. Lava pouring from a volcanic cone looks remarkably like a beast's breath. Gas vents resemble nostrils. Earthquakes feel like the shifting of a body beneath the ground. If one were to design a natural phenomenon that perfectly matched the myth of a fire-breathing dragon, one could hardly do better than a volcanic eruption. And yet, there is a deeper symbolic truth here. Volcanoes and dragons both represent power beyond human control. They are archetypes of chaos forces that can destroy, but also forces that create. After an eruption, the land may be devastated, but years later, the soil is among the most fertile in the world, feeding crops and sustaining civilizations. In the same way, dragons in mythology guard treasures or wisdom, their destructive fire balanced by the riches they protect. So when ancient peoples told stories of dragons beneath the mountains, they were not simply mistaking geology for biology. They were acknowledging a pattern, that destruction and creation, fear and reverence, often come from the same source. The dragon was the embodiment of the earth as hidden fire, a reminder that the ground beneath us is alive, and that we are, at all times, living atop something that could awaken. Perhaps that is why dragon myths persist, even now. Though we understand the science, the symbolism remains. When we see an eruption on the news, with molten rivers flowing down a slope, it is hard not to feel that some primordial dragon has stirred once again. The language of myth, even in the age of seismology, still shapes the way we describe the Earth's most dramatic spectacles. Volcanoes breathe, mountains roar, fire emerges from the Earth's heart, and somewhere in the human imagination, a dragon still lies beneath the stone, dreaming, waiting, alive in every eruption. For centuries, dragons have been regarded as creatures of legend, confined to the dusty pages of old tales, carvings on temple walls, or the imaginations of storytellers around a fire. And yet, scattered through history, are whispers that dragons were not only myth, but memory. That perhaps, long after the great beasts of prehistory vanished, a few survivors lingered in the hidden corners of the world. It is a tantalizing idea that dragons, in some form, were not entirely invented, but observed. Not universally extinct, but carefully concealed. As we drift through this chapter, let us consider the possibility of survival. Could the great winged reptiles of folklore have remained with us, only to fade from view as humans advanced, forests shrank, and mountains became mapped? In ancient Europe, medieval chronicles are curiously filled with reports of flying serpents and great worms terrorizing villages. In Wales, one such serpent was said to coil around hillsides, visible only at dusk as it slithered across the skyline. The chronicler Gervas of Tilbury, writing in the 12th century, casually described fiery flying serpents as though they were rare but real and occasional hazard rather than a fable. Were these sightings fabrications? Or did they represent fleeting encounters with animals now extinct, glimpsed only long enough to be feared but not studied? Africa, too, carries legends that blur the line between myth and zoology. In parts of Central Africa, explorers of the 19th and 20th centuries collected stories of a creature called the Kongamado, a flying reptile with leathery wings, a wingspan of several meters, and a terrifying shriek. Some described it as a bat. Others insisted it resembled a prehistoric pterosaur. Natives warned that to see the Kongamado was to invite death. Even today, in Zambia's remote river valleys, some claim the beast still soars on stormy nights. Skeptics argue it may have been exaggerated sightings of storks or crocodiles gliding across rivers. Yet the persistence of the legend leaves us wondering, why this particular image? Why a winged reptile? In the Middle East, Arab travelers recorded encounters with serpents said to guard mountain passes. One account tells of a massive winged snake that appeared during migrations across the Sinai. Greek historians like Herodotus, too, mention armies of winged serpents in Arabia, their bones littering valleys. To the rational mind, these may have been exaggerations of flocks of locusts, or perhaps crocodile remains. And yet, the image of a dragon-like beast lingers in the telling. But the most haunting reports come from modern times. In 1948, a British engineer flying over Namibia claimed to have seen two enormous creatures resembling crocodiles with wings gliding alongside his plane before veering away. Decades later, in the dense rainforests of Papua New Guinea, missionaries spoke of a glowing flying beast called the ropin. Locals described it as a long-tailed, bioluminescent predator, part bat, part reptile. Photographs remain elusive, the stories too strange to accept yet too consistent to dismiss. Of course, cryptozoology, the study of hidden animals, is full of similar tales. For every dragon, there is a skeptical explanation, misidentified birds, folklore amplified by fear, or simple hoaxes. And yet, sometimes science does catch up with myth. Consider the Komodo dragon of Indonesia. To Western ears, the idea of a 3-meter, flesh-eating lizard sounded absurd when first described in the early 20th century. It was dismissed as native superstition until explorers actually found them, lumbering across the islands armed with teeth and venom. For the villagers, the dragon was no myth. It was simply real. Or think of the giant squid for centuries. Tales of the kraken were written off as drunken sailors' yarns. Only in the last few decades has hard evidence surfaced, revealing colossal creatures that dwell in the deep. Once myth, now fact. If such animals could hide for centuries, why not a dragon or something like it? There is also the curious question of geography. Many suppose dragon sightings occur in remote, inaccessible landscapes. Volcanic mountains in Iceland, dense jungles of Central Africa, or the mist-filled valleys of China. These are the very places where human presence is sparse and discovery delayed. Could this explain why reports arise, but proof remains absent? The very traits attributed to dragons' flight, fire, subterranean lairs also lend themselves to elusiveness. A creature that roosts in caverns, soars high above clouds, or emerges only at night would be easily missed by human eyes. Another possibility lies in the fossil record itself. Even today, paleontologists stumble upon skeletons of enormous beasts never before catalogued. Bones weather out of cliffs or emerge from deserts after millennia of silence. For early people, stumbling upon a fossilized skull of a pterosaur or a dinosaur may have been enough to spark the conviction that dragons once roamed nearby. But what if some of those bones were fresher than we assume? Some paleontologists quietly admit that our record of prehistory is far from complete. Entire species may have lingered longer than thought, fading away not tens of millions of years ago, but thousands, even hundreds. If that were true, then the memory of humans encountering them could still echo in myth. It is here that the stories of St. George and Siegfried, of Fafnir and the Chinese long dragons, take on a new intrigue. They might not be pure fantasy. They might be distorted recollections of real confrontations with creatures long since gone. Imagine it. A knight venturing into a cave, only to face a massive serpent-like beast. A hunter in Africa, catching sight of leathery wings in the twilight. A fisherman in the Pacific, watching glowing shapes glide beneath the waves. Terrifying encounters that became embellished, retold, mythologized, yet grounded in something real. Of course, to the scientific mind, the burden of proof is heavy. Without bones, without bodies, without photographs, these remain shadows. But shadows have a way of persisting when the fire is bright enough. Perhaps dragons survived, if not in flesh, then in memory. Perhaps they live on, not as species hidden in jungles, but as genetic echoes within our storytelling, an inherited instinct that recalls predators we once feared. Or, just maybe, somewhere in the folds of the earth, in caverns unexplored, something stirs even now. So were dragons the last survivors of a forgotten age? Or are they nothing more than the long echo of our imagination, sharpened by fossils, fears, and fireside tales? The truth may lie between those two extremes. Perhaps some creatures, large reptiles, flying predators, glowing night hunters, really did walk beside us in historical times, only to vanish before science could record them. Perhaps others exist still, hidden in valleys where no one dares to tread. Or perhaps the dragons we seek are not in the jungles or the mountains, but in ourselves. In the stories we tell, in the warnings we pass down, in the deep ancestral memory of beasts that once ruled the earth. And so, as this chapter closes, we are left with an unsettling thought. If even one of these legends is true, then dragons are not gone. They are simply waiting. Throughout history, dragons have lived only in the realm of myth, painted in legends and breathed into stories. But today, we live in a world where imagination sometimes meets science. Humanity has mapped genomes, engineered synthetic organisms, and even resurrected echoes of the extinct. So the question arises, could we create a dragon? At first, the idea seems absurd pure fantasy. Yet the tools of modern biology are far stranger than any medieval wizard's spellbook. In laboratories around the world, scientists wield techniques like CRISPR, a gene-editing tool that allows precise alterations to DNA. With CRISPR, humanity has already produced glowing fish, hornless cattle, and mosquitoes designed not to spread malaria. Synthetic biology is not simply copying life, it is rewriting its very code. So what might a dragon be, if reimagined through science rather than story? We would begin with the building blocks of existing creatures. A dragon, after all, is a chimera, a fusion of traits found scattered across the animal kingdom. The leathery wings of a bat, the scales of a crocodile, the predatory vision of an eagle, the heat-producing chemistry of certain beetles, and perhaps the colossal size of a whale. If nature can produce these traits separately, could science one day weave them together into a single living tapestry? Of course, size is a daunting barrier. The largest flying creatures that ever lived, pterosaurs like Quetzalcoatlus, had wingspans of more than 10 meters. Yet even they were delicately built, lightweight, and fragile compared to the armored dragons of legend. The physics of flight is unforgiving. To give a living creature the bulk of a dragon and the power of true flight would stretch biology to its limits. Still, engineers speculate about gene-editing birds to increase their size, or even fabricating entirely new creatures designed for gliding rather than sustained flight. But what about fire? Fire is the very heart of dragon identity, the glowing breath that separates it from all natural predators. Here, again, science offers strange hints. In the insect world, bombardier beetles can mix chemicals inside their bodies to spray a boiling, noxious liquid at their enemies. In the plant world, methane is produced by simple digestion. And in the reptile world, venomous snakes already carry chemical delivery systems more sophisticated than medieval alchemists could ever have imagined. Could the blueprint for fire breath lie hidden in these scattered adaptations? If so, perhaps a synthetic creature could combine them. A biological furnace fueled by digestion, a specialized organ that ignites expelled gases, even an evolutionary mimic of the bombardier beetle's explosive chemistry scaled up to draconic size. The challenge is not only one of possibility, but of control. Creating such a being would mean tampering with forces we do not fully understand. A dragon would not simply be a marvel, it would be an apex predator, a threat to ecosystems and to us. To design one would be to summon both wonder and danger into the world. And yet, the temptation lingers. Humanity has always dreamed of giving form to its myths. Consider the woolly mammoth. Projects are already underway to bring back a cold-adapted elephant genetically engineered to resemble its extinct cousin. If we can restore a mammoth, why not attempt a dragon? Perhaps one day a biotech company, fueled by both ambition and spectacle, will announce a living dragon, not a creature from medieval bestiaries, but a modern genetic hybrid that approximates the myth. It might not fly or breathe fire, but it would be close enough to capture imaginations and headlines alike. But here lies an ethical frontier. Should we? Myths exist to inspire, to caution, to explain the unknown. To give them flesh is to blur the line between story and reality. A dragon in captivity would not be a free being of legend, but a laboratory artifact, an engineered curiosity. Would such a creature have the right to live, to be free, to exist beyond the spectacle of human invention? Or would it, like the cloned sheep Dolly, simply be a proof of concept, destined for short life and long debates? Moreover, ecosystems are delicate. Introduce a dragon fire-breathing, or not into the world, and the balance of predator and prey collapses. A single apex predator, capable of hunting both on land and in the air, could devastate animal populations. Human civilization itself might become prey. It is one thing to imagine, another to risk. And yet, in a strange sense, we are already creating dragons, though not in the shape we expect. Technology itself has become draconian. Drones fly in the skies like metal wyverns. Engines breathe fire. Weapons deliver destruction with the fury of 1,000 mythical beasts. Our machines are, in their way, dragons, or not from flesh, but from steel and code. Perhaps this is the real lesson of science. We do not need to create literal dragons to live alongside them. We have always forged their essence into our tools, our fears, our ambitions. The dragon is already here, wearing the face of human invention. Still, the dream persists, to stand before a scaled giant, to hear wings beat like thunder, to glimpse a tongue of flame in the night sky. Whether in myth or one day in science, dragons endure because they embody something eternal, our yearning to touch the impossible. So, could we recreate a dragon? Perhaps, with enough time, with enough daring, with enough disregard for caution. But whether we will, that is another matter entirely. For some creatures is safest when they remain in storybooks, rather than in the world outside our window. And maybe that is the final paradox. In seeking to bring dragons into reality, we risk forgetting why they mattered in the first place. Dragons are not just animals to be catalogued, dissected, or engineered. They are symbols, guardians of treasure, destroyers of worlds, mirrors of human imagination. To make them flesh may rob them of their mystery. For now, then, the dragon lives where it always has, in the spaces between myth and science, in the spark of curiosity, in the fire of human wonder. Throughout human history, dragons have haunted our stories, our myths, and even our dreams. But what if these creatures are not biological at all? What if they never lived in flesh and blood, yet remain just as real, alive inside the collective human imagination? Dragons, in this view, are not fossils or cryptids. They are archetypes, symbols born from the very depths of human psychology. Why do we see them everywhere? From the fjords of Scandinavia to the deserts of the Middle East, from Chinese river valleys to the rainforests of Central America. Across time and culture, humans told stories of serpentine monsters with impossible power. Could it be that dragons are the shape our most primal fears take? Carl Jung, the great psychologist, believed that humanity shares a collective unconscious, a storehouse of symbols and images repeated endlessly across cultures. In this mental landscape, the dragon is the ultimate shadow, a composite of every danger early humans once faced. Fire, storms, snakes, predators, and the chaos of the unknown. Think for a moment of the world as it was for our distant ancestors. The crackle of fire in the forest could mean destruction. A sudden storm, lightning splitting the night sky, felt like divine punishment. A snake in the grass could kill with one strike. A big cat stalking in the dark meant death was only heartbeats away. When these fears fused together in the human mind, they gave birth to something greater, a monster embodying them all. A dragon. But unlike mere danger, the dragon is always more than a threat. It is also a guardian, a gatekeeper to treasure, to wisdom, to transcendence. Myths tell us that to grow, to transform, the hero must first confront the dragon. St. George, Siegfried, Beowulf, all must slay or outwit the beast before they achieve greatness. In psychology, this is no accident. Facing the dragon represents facing the deepest fears of the self. Every culture frames this differently. In the East, dragons are not only destructive, but also wise. In Chinese tradition, they are masters of rain and water, forces of life as well as danger. In the West, dragons breathe fire and devour livestock, embodying chaos and greed. But at the core, both visions stem from the same truth. Dragons are how the human mind explains what it cannot control. They are also symbols of transformation. To confront the dragon is to face death, chaos, or fear, and to emerge changed. Joseph Campbell, in his famous hero's journey, described this stage as the ordeal. The dragon stands at the threshold. Only when the hero defeats it, or makes peace with it, can they claim the treasure, whether that treasure is literal gold, wisdom, or self-mastery. This pattern recurs endlessly in literature, dreams, and art. Think of Smaug in Tolkien's Middle-earth, curled around his hoard of treasure. Or the many-headed Hydra in Greek mythology, a beast that multiplied when attacked. Or the dragons of modern fantasy, who are not merely enemies, but mirrors of the characters themselves. Again and again, the dragon is not just a beast, it is a psychological test. Even in dreams, dragons appear. Psychologists who study dream symbols note that serpents, monsters, and dragons often surface when people are facing major life fears. A dragon in a dream may not mean you fear a literal monster, but rather a challenge so immense it feels monstrous. The dreamer must either flee or face it. But why dragons specifically? Why not another shape? Some researchers suggest that humans are hardwired to fear serpent-like forms. Studies in evolutionary psychology have found that even infants react more quickly to snakes and spiders than to neutral objects. These reflexes may be remnants of survival instincts burned into our nervous system. When imagination exaggerates those shapes, adds wings, fire, and impossible size, we get the ultimate fear symbol. At the same time, dragons also embody awe. They are terrifying, yes, but they also command respect. In some traditions, they are gods. In others, they are cosmic forces. The dragon can destroy, but it can also reveal hidden power. In this way, the dragon is not only an enemy, it is a teacher. Perhaps this is why the symbol never dies. Even today, in the modern world, where satellites map the Earth and science explains lightning, we still write about dragons. They live in fantasy novels, films, video games, and our collective imagination. When we create them, we are reenacting the oldest story, confronting our own shadows. Think of how often modern dragons are no longer simply villains. In children's stories, dragons can be friends, mentors, even misunderstood outcasts. This too reflects psychology. Once feared, the shadow can be integrated. The dragon that once terrified can now be a companion. By taming the monster within, we also tame the chaos of life. So perhaps the real question is not whether dragons existed, but why we need them. They give shape to our fears. They force us to imagine courage. They transform storms, predators, and death into symbols we can understand. And they remind us that every treasure worth seeking, wisdom, growth, love, or peace, lies just beyond the monster we are most afraid to face. The dragon is inside us, and so is the hero who must confront it. Imagine for a moment that the myths were not myths at all, that the fire-breathing monsters of legend were not symbols, not stories, but living, breathing creatures who stalk the skies. What would our world look like if dragons were real, not just in the imagination, but in the chronicles of human history? To enter this thought experiment, we must suspend disbelief and step into an alternate timeline. A timeline in which Homo sapiens shared their rise not with tigers and mammoths alone, but with the most formidable predator imaginable, the dragon. If dragons were real, they would have influenced humanity from the very beginning. Early humans, armed with nothing but stone tools and fire, would have been vastly overmatched. Just as our ancestors painted mammoths and lions on cave walls, so too would they have painted dragons, perhaps not only as symbols of fear, but as a warning. A claw mark scratched into rock might have signaled to a clan, "Here lives the beast of fire." Would humanity have survived at all? Perhaps, but survival would have required unity. Small tribes might have needed to band together earlier, forming alliances not against rival humans, but against the sky predators above. In this way, dragons might have forced the emergence of culture, ritual, and cooperation even sooner than in our own timeline. The transition to farming, the Neolithic Revolution, might also have looked very different. Imagine a village of mud brick houses in Mesopotamia. Crops of wheat rise in the fields. Goats bleat in their pens. Suddenly, a shadow falls. A dragon swoops low, and within minutes, the year's harvest is gone in fire and smoke. How would ancient societies have adapted? They might have built their settlements under cliffs and caves for protection, or dug into the earth like troglodyte cities. Early irrigation canals could have doubled as moats, designed not only for farming, but as watery defenses. Domesticated dogs and cats would not have been enough. Humanity might have sought larger guardians breeding enormous cattle, or even elephants as dragon watch sentinels. In this alternate history, agriculture itself may have required new rituals. Crops would not only be sown and harvested, they would be consecrated, offered as tribute to keep dragons away. The earliest religions could have been founded not on the movements of stars, but on the need to placate winged overlords. By the Bronze Age, city-states like Uruk, Thebes, and Mohenjo-Daro were rising. But imagine if their walls were not just to defend against armies, but against dragons. Defensive architecture might have included massive towers capped with metal spikes, designed to keep beasts from landing. Early militaries might have formed specialized dragon corps, soldiers armed with long spears, nets, or primitive flame-resistant shields soaked in brine. The stories we know of Gilgamesh or Hercules may have been less symbolic and more literal tales of kings who truly battled monsters. To rule in such a world would require not only political cunning, but also the ability to drive away or slay dragons. Dynasties might have risen and fallen not from famine alone, but from dragon raids that could wipe out entire capitals in an evening. In this alternate past, the history of empire becomes the history of dragon hunters. Rome, China, Persia all would have needed legions not only to expand their borders, but to secure their skies. Religion too would be reshaped. If dragons were real, then gods might not only be invisible, heavenly powers, but flesh and blood beings who stalked mountains. The book of Exodus might describe not only plagues of locusts, but a dragon descending upon Pharaoh's land. Hindu stories of Naga serpents, Chinese tales of lone dragons, and biblical accounts of Leviathan would no longer be metaphors, but written histories of lived encounters. Sacrifices at temples might not have been symbolic at all, but literal offerings of animals or humans to satisfy nearby dragons. Priests could have been not only keepers of ritual, but negotiators, mediating between frightened populations and the winged beasts that demanded tribute. The line between god and animal would blur. Dragons might have been worshipped outright, enthroned as divine rulers over cities, their lairs turned into sacred shrines. Now picture medieval Europe. Castles already bristled with towers and walls, but in a world with dragons, their architecture would have been even more extreme. High stone roofs with angled ridges might have been designed to keep dragons from perching. Entire moats could have been widened to discourage fiery attacks. Knights, so often depicted in dragon tales, would have been genuine dragon fighters. Their armor might have been coated in asbestos-like materials, or forged with metals designed to resist heat. The legend of St. George slaying the dragon might not have been allegory, but history, the record of one of the few successful human victories against the sky predators. Guilds might have emerged dedicated solely to dragon hunting, passing down knowledge of weak points, poisons, and tactics. Fire-resistant herbs could have become as valuable as gold. The feudal system itself might have hinged not only on land ownership, but on proximity to dragon habitats. Kings might have rewarded loyal nobles with dragon-free lands, while punishing enemies by sending them to frontier zones where dragons still reigned. As technology advanced, the presence of dragons would have shaped the art of war. Gunpowder may not have been invented simply to fight men, but as a desperate attempt to repel dragons. Cannons pointed not just at castle walls, but at the skies. By the Renaissance, explorers setting sail across oceans would have feared not only storms and scurvy, but winged predators circling their ships. Perhaps the age of discovery would have been delayed or accelerated, as kingdoms sought safer havens beyond dragon-infested homelands. Imagine Napoleonic armies marching into battle, muskets raised not only against enemy soldiers, but against dragons, whose sudden intervention could turn the tide of war. Or World War I trenches, not only filled with mud and gas, but with terrified men looking upward for fiery shadows in the clouds. Dragons would have been the ultimate weapons of mass destruction, unpredictable and untamable. Some nations might have tried to domesticate them, breeding smaller species as war beasts. Others might have gone extinct under the weight of dragonfire. And if dragons had survived into the modern age, cities would look radically different. Skyscrapers might be capped with electrified spikes, airports reinforced with anti-dragon artillery. Flight itself, the marvel of the 20th century, might have been delayed by centuries, grounded by the constant threat of predators in the sky. Nuclear weapons might have been developed not for deterrence between nations, but as the only conceivable way to kill the largest and most dangerous dragons. Environmental laws might focus not only on pollution, but on maintaining fragile peace between humanity and the dwindling dragon population. Today, our news might carry headlines such as "Dragon Sighting Over Tokyo Bay" or "UN Debates Treaty on Dragon Hunting in the Amazon." Wildlife conservationists might fight to preserve the last of the great beasts, while local villagers begged for their extermination. Zoos could hold not lions and elephants, but scaled, fire-breathing creatures behind reinforced glass. Even entertainment would shift. Films might not imagine dragons as fantasy, but document them in wildlife specials. Our fairy tales would be records, our mythology, history. But perhaps the greatest change would not be material, but psychological. Humanity has always imagined itself at the top of the food chain. With dragons, that certainty vanishes. Every fire built, every tower raised, every kingdom founded would have been done under the shadow of creatures greater than ourselves. Would this make us humbler, more cautious, or more ambitious, driven by the desperate need to surpass even the dragons? Perhaps our science would have raced faster. Perhaps our faiths would have deepened. Or perhaps we would have perished altogether, our fragile species unable to compete with predators from legend. In the end, a world with dragons is not simply a world with new animals. It is a world in which the very story of humanity changes. Every invention, every war, every prayer would have been shaped by the fire in the skies. And so we are left with a tantalizing paradox. Dragons never lived, and yet, in our myths and dreams, they have shaped us all the same. Even in this world without them, their shadows linger, reminding us that sometimes the greatest predators live not in nature, but in imagination. The journey ends here, at the quiet edge of imagination, where history, myth, and science dissolve into silence. We have followed dragons through ancient texts and temple carvings, through volcanic ash and constellations, through the fragile corridors of memory. Now, in this final chapter, we return to a simple question. If dragons were never real, why have they lived so long within us? Across cultures and centuries, dragons are not uniform creatures, but they share something essential. They are beings of power terrible, untamed, majestic. They are fire and water, death and rebirth, chaos and order. In their many forms, they embody what humans could not control: storms, predators, floods, the shaking of the earth. A dragon is not simply a monster, it is a mirror, reflecting back our awe at the vastness of the world. Think of the storytellers, long before books and libraries, who sat before a fire and tried to explain thunder. They gave it a shape, a scale-covered face, a roar that split the sky. They gave lightning wings. They gave smoke a tail. They gave fear a name. Dragons were never fossils dug from the earth, nor living animals caged in wood and iron. They were human inventions. And yet, like so much we invent, they became real in their own way. For children, dragons are the guardians of treasure and the enemies of knights. For the faithful, they are symbols of sin or cosmic struggle. For poets and painters, they are muses of the imagination, curling in ink and flame across page and canvas. Even now, in the modern age, they endure on the banners of nations, in the language of fantasy, in the quiet corners of dreams. The persistence of dragons tells us something profound. Humanity does not simply seek facts, we seek meaning. A fossilized skull can be explained by science, a volcanic eruption by geology, a thunderstorm by meteorology. But meaning requires more than explanation. And so we clothed bones in scales, turned molten rock into flame, and painted stars as serpents devouring the moon. In doing so, we gave ourselves a way to live with the terrifying unknown. There is another reason dragons linger. They are not just symbols of fear, they are symbols of transformation. In many stories, to confront the dragon is to undergo change. The knight becomes a hero by slaying it. The village is freed from oppression by outlasting it. The king proves his right to rule by mastering it. The dragon is both danger and opportunity, destruction and creation. It is the fire that consumes and the fire that forges. Perhaps that is why, even in cultures separated by oceans and centuries, the image returns again and again. We all confront dragons, whether real or imagined. Some are outside of us, the storms, the predators, the forces of nature. But most live within the fears we carry, the grief we endure, the shadows that creep across the mind. To imagine dragons is to wrestle with these truths. And perhaps, in giving them shape, we lessen their hold upon us. So what remains when we strip away the myths and the speculation? No fossilized bones of fire-breathing beasts, no hidden creatures in remote jungles, no fire curling from scaled jaws. And yet something still lingers, something that refuses to die. Dragons are proof that even if something never existed, it can still be immortal. Not in flesh, but in thought. Not in the soil, but in the soul. It may be that the true home of dragons is not the past at all, but the future. Each time a child imagines wings beating against the sky, each time an artist paints scales shimmering in light, each time a storyteller whispers of fire coiled in the mountains, the dragon is reborn. They will outlast us, not as living creatures, but as living symbols. And so, in closing, we return to the paradox. Dragons never lived, and yet they are among the most enduring beings we know. They are ashes and they are wonder. They are proof that imagination is stronger than extinction, that the human need for myth is as fierce as hunger, as enduring as breath. The next time you look at the curve of a mountain, the flicker of a flame, the arc of the Milky Way, you may see nothing but stone or fire or light. Or perhaps you will glimpse something more, a shadow that does not truly exist, and yet has always been with us. The dragon, not real, and yet somehow forever alive.